Dear Preston, I'm dying. And our daughter needs her father.
I failed you once, Danica. I won't fail her. I'm coming.
She has 3 months to live. Her only wish is for the billionaire CEO to meet the daughter. He never knew the city sprawled beneath him like a kingdom awaiting orders. 47 floors above San Francisco, Preston Edmund Hawthorne III stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, watching the fog roll across the bay with the detachment of a man who had conquered everything worth conquering. His reflection stared back at him, tailored charcoal suit, silver cufflinks catching the afternoon. Light, jaw set in the permanent tension of a man who signed billion-dollar deals before breakfast. In his left hand, he held a handwritten letter. In 3 sentences, Preston Hawthorne learned he was a father, that the only woman he ever loved was dying, and that he had exactly 90 days to become the man he should have been 10 years ago. Some letters carry words. This one carried a decade of silence, a daughter he never knew existed, and a death sentence for the woman who had vanished with his heart. Before we continue, I want to take a moment to thank every single one of you who has pushed this channel past the 3,500 subscriber milestone. That number represents more than just growth. It represents a community of people who believe in the power of stories that transform us, that challenge us, that remind us what it means to be human. If you believe in second chances, if you believe that even broken people deserve a shot at redemption, share this video right now with someone who needs to hear this story. Send it to your best friend. Post it in your family group chat. Tag that person who thinks their past mistakes have disqualified them from a beautiful future. To our new viewers discovering this channel for the first time, welcome to the family. To those of you who return week after week, thank you for trusting me with your time. This story is for all of you. And before we journey into this emotional territory together, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and join the Mr. Steele Rich Stories family. Because this story will change how you see love, loss, and legacy. Ring that notification bell so you never miss a moment. Now, let us return to that corner office, where the most powerful man in the room had just become the most powerless. Preston Edmund Hawthorne III had built his life on control. His corner office occupied the northeast corner of the Hawthorne Financial Tower, a monument to 3 generations of accumulated wealth and influence. The space itself was a masterclass in understated dominance. Hand-selected African mahogany panels lining the walls, a Persian rug worth more than most houses positioned beneath his custom-designed desk, and a collection of rare first-edition books arranged not for reading, but for intimidation. On his desk sat 3 phones. The first connected him directly to the company's board of directors. The second was a secure line to political contacts across 4 continents. The third, the one that almost never rang, connected to the private numbers of 11 heads of state who considered Preston not merely an acquaintance, but a necessary ally. At 41 years old, he controlled assets exceeding $14 billion. His signature could move markets. His disapproval could tank stock prices. His approval could launch empires. Yet for all this power, Preston Hawthorne lived in a peculiar kind of prison. His penthouse apartment in Pacific Heights contained 7 bedrooms that had never hosted guests. His kitchen, designed by an Italian architect who had renovated palaces for European royalty, saw no cooking beyond the occasional reheating of takeout containers. The only photographs in his home were professionally staged shots required for magazine profiles, images of a man performing happiness for public consumption. He dated occasionally, beautiful women selected with the same calculated precision he applied to business acquisitions. But those relationships followed predictable trajectories. 3 months of attention, carefully managed expectations, generous parting gifts and clean exits. No drama, no attachment, no risk. His therapist, whom he visited exactly twice before terminating the arrangement, had suggested that Preston was running from something. Preston had politely informed the man that people who built empires didn't run from anything. They simply chose not to look backward. This was a lie, of course. A lie so practiced that Preston had almost convinced himself it was true. Almost. Because there was one door in his mind that remained permanently locked, one name he never spoke, one face he refused to let surface in his consciousness. Danica Marie Wells. 10 years he had maintained this wall. 10 years of redirecting his thoughts whenever her memory threatened to emerge. 10 years of working 18-hour days, partly because he loved success, but mostly because exhaustion prevented dreaming. And now, standing in his monument to control, Preston held a handwritten envelope. Addressed in a script he recognized instantly despite the decade that had passed. The letter had arrived in the afternoon mail delivery. His executive assistant, Margaret, a 63-year-old woman who had served his father before him and who knew more about the Hawthorne family than any biographer ever would, had brought in the day's correspondence at precisely 2:15 p.m. This was their ritual. Every afternoon Margaret filtered through the noise the invitations to galas, the requests for charitable contributions, the vendor proposals and partnership pitches, and delivered only what required Preston's personal attention. Today's stack was unremarkable. A contract requiring his signature for a shipping company acquisition, an invitation to address the Economic Forum in Davos, a handwritten note from the governor thanking him for his support during the recent campaign, and beneath these expected items, a single envelope that did not belong. No return address, no corporate letterhead, just his name, Preston, written across the front in blue ink, the handwriting elegant and immediately recognizable. Margaret had noticed his reaction. After 34 years of service, she could read the micro-expressions that Preston presented to the world. But she was far too professional to comment. She simply closed the door quietly behind her, leaving him alone with whatever storm that envelope contained. For 17 minutes, Preston did not open it. He set it on his desk and paced the length of his office. He poured himself a glass of water from the crystal decanter on his sidebar and drank it without tasting. He checked his phone for emails he had already read. He adjusted the positioning of his fountain pen. He did everything except address the envelope that seemed to pulse with its own gravitational field. Finally, with the same decisive motion he used to approve hostile takeovers, Preston picked up the envelope and tore it open. 3 pages of handwritten text, blue ink, no date at the top, just 2 words to begin. He began to read, "Dear Preston, I know I have no right to contact you after all these years. I know what I did when I left. I know the questions I left unanswered, and I know that by the time you finish this letter, you will have every reason to hate me even more than you probably already do. But I'm writing anyway, because 10 years ago, I made a decision to protect you from a truth I thought would destroy us both. And now that truth has come looking for its father. Preston, you have a daughter. Her name is Lily. She turned 9 years old last month. She has your eyes, that precise shade of grey that shifts to blue depending on the light. She has your stubbornness, your intelligence, your maddening need to understand how everything works before accepting it. She reads books meant for children twice her age. She argues with her teachers when they're wrong, and wins. She is the best thing I have ever done with my life. I didn't tell you about her because I was terrified of what your family would do. Terrified of the lawyers and the battles and the custody fights that your mother made very clear would consume everything. Terrified that in protecting Lily from that war, I would lose her entirely. So I ran. I took your daughter and I vanished, and I told myself every single day that I was keeping her safe. That someday, when the timing was right, I would reach out. I will explain. I would give you the chance you deserved. That timing never felt right. Days became months. Months became years. And I convinced myself that the longer I waited, the more impossible the truth became. But now there's no more time for waiting. Preston, I'm sick. The kind of sick that doesn't get better. The doctors say I have 3 months, maybe 4, if I respond well to treatment. They use phrases like quality of life and comfortable transition, and I understand what those phrases mean. I'm dying. And when I'm gone, Lily will have no one. Preston's hands had begun trembling somewhere around the word daughter. By the time he died, the tremor had spread to his entire body. His legs felt distant, uncertain. The room, this fortress he had built to hold the world at bay, seemed suddenly fragile. Constructed of nothing more substantial than paper and good intentions. He continued reading, though the words now swam before his vision. I don't expect your forgiveness. I'm not sure I would offer it if our positions were reversed. What I did was unforgivable, and I've lived with that knowledge every day for 9 years. But Lily deserves to know her father. And you deserve the chance to know your daughter, the daughter I stole from you. I've told her about you. Not everything, but enough. She knows you exist. She knows you're successful. She knows that things were complicated between us, but that you loved me once, and that whatever happened wasn't her fault. She wants to meet you. I'm asking you, begging you really, to give her that chance. Not for my sake, for hers. And if I'm being honest, for yours too. I live in Portland now. Small apartment in the Alberta district. Nothing like the world you inhabit, but it's home. We've been happy here, Lily and me. As happy as two people can be when they're carrying a secret this heavy. My number is at the bottom of this letter. I'll wait to hear from you. And if I don't hear, if you can't find it in yourself to respond, I'll understand. I'll figure something else out for Lily. I always have. But I hope you call. I hope you come. I hope that somewhere beneath the man I've watched from a distance all these years, the Preston I loved still exists. I hope so. Always, Danica. The letter slipped from Preston's fingers. It floated to the floor with an almost deliberate slowness, the pages, settling against the Persian rug like leaves falling in autumn. Preston watched it fall without moving to catch it. Then his legs gave way. He didn't sit so much as collapse into his leather chair, the furniture absorbing his weight with a soft exhale. His hands gripped the armrests with white-knuckled intensity, as if the chair itself might vanish if he released his hold. A daughter, 9 years old, named Lily. She had his eyes. Danica was dying. 90 days. The thoughts came in fragments, each one striking his consciousness like stones thrown into still water. He could not seem to assemble them into a coherent whole. They existed separately, orbiting the black hole that had opened in his chest. Outside his window, the city continued its indifferent afternoon rhythms. Cars crawled along the Embarcadero. Tourists gathered at Fisherman's Wharf. Somewhere, deals were being made, fortunes won and lost. Lives lived in complete ignorance of the fact that Preston Hawthorne's carefully constructed universe had just suffered a catastrophic collapse. He did not know how long he sat there. Could have been minutes, could have been an hour. When Margaret knocked gently at 4 p.m. to remind him of his conference call with Tokyo, Preston did not answer. She opened the door a crack, saw him sitting motionless, staring at nothing, and quietly closed it again. She had never seen that expression on his face before. It was the look of a man meeting a ghost. But to understand why this letter hit Preston like a bullet to the chest, we need to go back. Back to the woman who learned that love was never a guarantee. Back to the story of Danica Marie Wells, the brilliant daughter who walked into Preston Hawthorne's life like a hurricane and walked out like a whisper. Back to where all of this truly began. Every survivor has an origin story. Danica Marie Wells wrote hers in abandonment and rewrote it in resilience, while Preston sat paralyzed in his corner office, the letter lying on his Persian rug. We must travel backward through time, before the letter, before the daughter was named Lily, before the love that would shake two worlds to their foundations. We must meet the woman who learned, long before she ever heard the name, Hawthorne, that the only person she could truly count on was herself. Sacramento, California. Summer of 1989. 7-year-old Danica Marie Wells pressed her face against the window of their second-floor apartment, watching her father load the last cardboard box into the trunk of his rusty Chevrolet. Thomas James Wells moved with the deliberate slowness of a man who had already made his decision but hadn't found the courage to announce it. Danica knew. Children always know. She had watched her parents' marriage deteriorate through doorway cracks and late-night arguments. She had seen the way her father's eyes went hollow when he looked at their cramped living room, the walls yellowed from years of deferred maintenance. She had felt his restlessness like a living thing, pacing the apartment late at night, smoking cigarettes on the fire escape, staring at horizons that didn't include his wife and daughter. Now he is leaving. He looked up once, just before climbing into the driver's seat. Their eyes met through the window glass, his guilty and defensive, hers steady and already hardening into something beyond her years. He raised one hand in a gesture that might have been a wave or might have been an apology. Then the engine coughed to life, and Thomas James Wells drove out of his daughter's life forever. Danica didn't cry. Even at 7, she understood that tears were currency, and she refused to spend hers on someone who had already declared her worthless through the simple act of leaving. Her mother found her still standing at that window an hour later. Claudine Renee Wells was a registered nurse at Sacramento General Hospital, a woman who had spent the last decade stitching together other people's wounds while her own marriage bled out quietly in the background. She was exhausted, heartbroken, and utterly unsurprised by her husband's departure. But she was also made of something unbreakable. She knelt beside her daughter, gathering the small body into arms that smelled of antiseptic and coffee. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The apartment felt cavernous now, emptied of masculine presence, filled, instead, with the particular silence that follows abandonment. "Mama," Danica finally whispered, "why didn't he say goodbye?" Claudine pulled back, cupping her daughter's face between her palms. Her eyes held no false comfort, no pretty lies. "Because goodbyes require courage, baby girl, and your father ran out of courage a long time ago. Will he come back?" Claudine considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. She could have offered hope. She could have softened the blow with maybes and somedays. But Claudine Wells had been raised by a grandmother who believed that hard truths built stronger children than comfortable lies. "No," she said simply. "He won't." Danica absorbed this information the way she would absorb everything. In the years to come, completely, permanently, transformatively. "Then we don't need him," she declared, her small voice carrying a conviction that surprised them both. Claudine smiled then, a fierce and proud expression that Danica would remember for the rest of her life. "That's exactly right, baby. We don't need anyone who doesn't choose us. And more importantly, don't you ever wait for anyone to save you. You save yourself. You hear me?" "Yes, Mama. Promise me." "I promise." It was a covenant sealed in that cramped Sacramento apartment, witnessed only by afternoon sunlight and the fading rumble of Thomas Wells's departing car. A philosophy that would shape every decision Danica made for the next 30 years. Don't wait for anyone to save you. Save yourself. Claudine worked double shifts to keep their apartment, sometimes triple shifts during the holidays when overtime paid time and a half. Danica learned to make herself invisible, to need nothing, to require no attention that might distract her mother from the exhausting business of survival. She became the quiet girl in every classroom, the one who sat in the back corner, who turned in perfect assignments, who answered questions only when directly called upon. Teachers wrote comments on her report cards like exceptionally bright, but should participate more and seem isolated from peers. Danica read these observations and felt nothing. Isolation was not a curse. It was a strategy. People who needed others were vulnerable. People who stood alone were free. She watched. She listened. She noticed everything. The way her third-grade teacher's smile tightened whenever the principal walked past. The way the popular girls turned their cruelty on and off like a faucet depending on adult presence. The way boys who seemed friendly in hallways became predatory in unsupervised corners. By 12, Danica could read a room within 30 seconds of entering it. By 15, she could predict the trajectory of relationships simply by observing body language and word choices. By 18, she had developed an almost supernatural ability to sense danger before it materialized. These were survival skills, honed in the laboratory of a fatherless childhood. They would serve her well in the years to come. They would also, eventually, fail her completely when confronted with the one man she couldn't read. But that confrontation was still years away. Danica graduated from her Sacramento high school with honors and a partial scholarship to California State University's architecture program. The scholarship covered tuition. For everything else, she worked. Waitressing, retail, a brief stint as a night security guard at a warehouse, where she studied structural engineering textbooks between rounds. Architecture had chosen her, not the reverse. At 14, she had accompanied Claudine to a hospital fundraiser, a rare mother-daughter outing made possible by a cancelled shift. The event was held in a newly constructed wing designed by a celebrated Oakland firm. Danica spent the evening ignoring the catered food and staring upward at the cathedral-like atrium, trying to understand how steel and glass and concrete could create something that felt almost sacred. "It makes you feel small," she murmured to herself, but not in a bad way. Small, like part of something bigger. A passing architect overheard her observation and stopped, genuinely startled by the insight. He spent 20 minutes explaining load-bearing principles and the psychology of spatial design to a teenager who absorbed every word with the intensity of a convert receiving scripture. That night, Danica knew what she wanted to build with her life. Not just buildings, permanence, stability, structures that would stand long after the fragile humans who created them had crumbled to dust. She wanted to leave marks on skylines. She wanted to create spaces where people felt safe, protected, held. All the things her father had never provided. Her undergraduate years passed in a blur of coursework and employment. She had no time for parties, limited patience for college drama, and exactly zero interest in the boys who occasionally attempted to pierce her reserve. Her classmates found her intimidating, her professors found her brilliant, and Danica found herself increasingly comfortable in her solitude. She graduated summa cum laude at 22 and accepted a position as an architectural assistant at Morrison & Reyes, a small but respected Oakland firm. The pay was modest. The hours were brutal. The work was primarily invisible, preparing materials for senior architects, correcting drafting, errors, attending meetings where she was expected to take notes and remain silent. But she was becoming someone. Every evening, she called Claudine to report on her progress. Her mother, now in her late 40s with graying temples and chronic back pain from decades of nursing, listened with undisguised pride. "My daughter, the architect," Claudine would say, and Danica could hear the smile in her voice. "Not yet, Mama. I'm just an assistant. You won't be for long. I raised you to climb, baby girl. You don't know any other direction." She was right. By 24, Danica had earned a junior designer position. By 26, she was leading small projects under senior supervision. By 28, her designs favored clean lines, sustainable materials, and a particular attention to natural light that reviewers described as quietly transformative. She dated occasionally, careful, controlled interactions with men who understood that her career came first and emotions came never. These relationships ended predictably when partners pushed for more than Danica was willing to give. "You're impossible to reach," one frustrated boyfriend complained during their final conversation. "Then stop reaching," she replied, not unkindly. "We'll both be happier." At 31 years old, Danica Marie Wells had constructed exactly the life she'd promised herself in that Sacramento apartment. Independent, successful, untouchable. She answered to no one. She needed no one. She had saved herself, just as Claudine taught her. And then a consulting project landed on her desk. A collaborative venture between Morrison & Reyes and a San Francisco development corporation planning a mixed-use complex in the Mission District. The corporation was called Hawthorne Development. The project lead was Preston Edmund Hawthorne III. The conference room on the 34th floor of Hawthorne Financial Tower was designed to intimidate. Danica recognized the tactic immediately. The oversized table, the strategic placement of windows to backlight whoever sat at the head position, the subtle height difference between the executive chairs and the visitor seating. She catalogued these details with professional interest while taking her assigned seat at the far end of the table. As the junior member of the Morrison & Reyes consulting team, her role was clearly defined. Observe, take notes, and under no circumstances speak unless directly addressed. This was her first exposure to genuine corporate wealth. Oakland had its share of successful businesses, but nothing approaching the concentrated power radiating from every surface of this room. The artwork alone, 2 original Rothkos flanking the entrance, was worth more than her firm's annual revenue. Danica adjusted her modest blazer, suddenly conscious of how out of place her Target wardrobe appeared against this backdrop of understated luxury. But she refused to shrink. Claudine Wells hadn't raised a shrinking daughter. The Hawthorne delegation filed in with the casual confidence of people who had never questioned their right to occupy any space they chose. Legal counsel, financial advisors, project managers with leather portfolios and titanium pens. And then Preston Edmund Hawthorne III entered. Danica had researched him, of course. Business publications painted him as a ruthless negotiator, a visionary developer, and the heir to a family fortune that stretched back 4 generations. Photographs showed a conventionally handsome man with sharp features and expensive tailoring. But photographs had failed to capture the particular energy he carried into a room. He wasn't especially tall, perhaps 6 feet, no more. His suit was impeccable but not ostentatious. His hair, dark brown with premature silver threading at the temples, was styled with the careful casualness that required significant effort to appear effortless. What struck Danica was his eyes, grey. Not blue-grey or green-grey, but true grey, the colour of February storm clouds. And beneath the polished corporate exterior, those eyes held something she recognized instinctively. Hunger. Not for money or power, he had those in abundance, but for something else, something he probably couldn't name himself. She filed this observation away and returned her attention to a notebook as the meeting commenced. For 90 minutes, senior architects and Hawthorne executives exchanged proposals, timelines, and budget projections. Danica recorded everything in her precise handwriting, watching the power dynamics shift and settle like tectonic plates beneath a mountain range. Preston led the discussion with practiced authority. His questions were sharp, his observations sharper. When Morrison and Reyes's lead architect suggested an aggressive construction timeline, Preston dismantled the proposal. In 3 sentences, exposing logistical weaknesses the senior architect had clearly hoped to gloss over. No one challenged him. The dynamic was obvious. Preston Hawthorne spoke, others listened, and disagreement was neither expected nor welcomed. Then he made his mistake. During a presentation of preliminary design concepts, Preston pulled up a slide, showing the proposed foundation specifications for the mixed-use complex. He spoke confidently about load-bearing calculations and material requirements, clearly accustomed to commanding respect on technical matters. But something in the numbers didn't match. Danica frowned, reviewing her notes from the pre-meeting briefing. The site report had included soil composition data from the geotechnical survey. Data that contradicted the assumptions underlying Preston's foundation specifications. She glanced around the room. The senior architects were nodding. The Hawthorne team was taking notes. No one had noticed the discrepancy. For 30 seconds, Danica wrestled with herself. Speaking up was not her role. Junior assistants who contradicted billionaires in their own conference rooms did not enjoy long careers. The intelligent move was to stay silent, mention the issue to her supervisor later, and let the correction filter upward through proper channels. But those foundation specifications would fail, maybe not immediately, but within a decade. The soil composition in that section of the Mission District contained clay deposits that would shift under the proposed load calculations. The building would settle unevenly. Cracks would form. Structural integrity would compromise. People could be hurt. Danica raised her hand. The room went silent. Every head turned toward the far end of the table, where the quiet woman in the modest blazer had just done something unprecedented. Preston's expression cycled through several emotions in rapid succession: surprise, irritation, curiosity. He settled on a polite condescension that Danica recognized from every man who had ever underestimated her. "Yes? Miss Wells, Danica Wells." Her voice remained steady. "I apologize for the interruption, Mr. Hawthorne, but there's an error in your foundation specifications. The temperature in the room dropped several degrees. Preston's legal counsel leaned forward with predatory interest. The Morrison and Reyes lead architect looked physically ill. An error, Preston repeated, his tone perfectly neutral. Yes, sir. Your load-bearing calculations assume uniform soil composition across the site. But the geotechnical survey from March, page 47 of the preliminary report, indicates significant clay deposits in the northwest quadrant. Clay expands and contracts with moisture variation. Under your current specifications, differential settlement would occur within 7 to 10 years. The building would shift. Structural damage would be inevitable. She delivered this assessment without defensiveness or apology. These were facts. Facts didn't require emotional packaging. Preston stared at her for a long moment. The room held its breath. Then he picked up his tablet, scrolled to the referenced page, and read silently for nearly 2 minutes. When he looked up, his expression had transformed entirely. You're right, he said, simply, without qualification. We would have caught this during detailed engineering, but you're absolutely right. These specifications need revision. No one challenged him. Ever. But this woman, this quiet, composed woman in a modest blazer, had just corrected him in front of his entire team, and instead of deflecting or defending, he had acknowledged her accuracy. For the first time in the meeting, Preston Hawthorne looked genuinely interested in something other than the deal itself. He looked interested in her. The meeting concluded 40 minutes later. Danica gathered her materials with the same methodical precision she applied to everything, ignoring the pointed looks from her supervisor and the whispered conversations clearly discussing her audacity. She expected repercussions, perhaps a formal reprimand, possibly reassignment from the project. She had violated unspoken protocols, and corporate environments rarely forgave such violations regardless of whether the violator was correct. What she did not expect was Preston Hawthorne waiting in the hallway. He leaned against the wall beside the elevator bank with studied casualness, scrolling through his phone with apparent disinterest. But when Danica emerged from the conference room, he looked up immediately. Miss Wells. A moment. It was phrased as a question, but delivered as a command. Danica considered refusing. She owed this man nothing, and his wealth did not entitle him to her time. But curiosity had always been her weakness. Of course, Mr. Hawthorne. He fell into step beside her, matching her pace as they walked toward the elevator. Up close, he seemed less imposing than he had in the conference room. The armor of corporate authority seemed thinner here, more permeable. Your observation during the presentation, he began, regarding the soil composition, was accurate, Danica finished. As you confirmed, something flickered across his features. Amusement? Surprise? You don't lack confidence. Confidence and accuracy aren't the same thing, Mr. Hawthorne. I happen to have both in that instance. He stopped walking. She stopped with him. You were right, he said. The words seemed to cost him something. Not pride exactly, but effort. As if genuine admission was a language he rarely spoke. I've reviewed the complete geotechnical survey since the meeting. Your analysis was correct in every particular. The foundation specifications need significant revision. Danica nodded, accepting this confirmation without visible satisfaction. I'm glad the error was identified before construction began. It was identified because you spoke up when no one else would. He studied her with an intensity that might have been unsettling from a less controlled man. Why did you? Because the building would have failed. People would have been hurt. You could have informed your supervisor privately. Let the correction filter through appropriate channels. Protect your position. I could have, Danica agreed. But appropriate channels take time. And the longer an error persists unchallenged, the more momentum it gains. Better to address problems directly. Preston was quiet for a moment. When he spoke again, his voice had lost some of its boardroom polish. No one challenges me, ever. It's the unfortunate consequence of accumulated authority. Everyone is so focused on agreeing with me that errors go unnoticed until they become catastrophes. Then you should hire people willing to disagree with you. Perhaps I should. He smiled then. Not the practiced smile of corporate photographs, but something genuine, almost boyish. It transformed his face entirely, revealing the human beneath the executive. "Have coffee with me." The request caught Danica off guard. She had expected many outcomes from this conversation. None of them involved coffee invitations. "That's not a question," she observed. "No," he admitted. "It's not. But I'm learning that you respond better to directness than to social niceties." He wasn't wrong. Danica appreciated people who said what they meant. The corporate world was drowning in euphemisms and polite misdirection. Preston's bluntness was almost refreshing. But her instincts, those survival mechanisms honed over 2 decades, were sounding quiet alarms. This man represented everything she had trained herself to avoid. Wealth she couldn't match. Power she couldn't counter. A world where she would always be the outsider, the interloper, the woman from the wrong side of consequence. "I don't mix professional and personal relationships, Mr. Hawthorne." "Preston," he corrected. "And this wouldn't be mixing anything. This would be one coffee, 2 colleagues discussing soil composition and structural engineering. Unless you find geotechnical surveys unbearably romantic." Despite herself, Danica laughed. It was a small sound, barely more than an exhale, but Preston's eyes lit up as if she had given him a gift. "I know what you're doing," she said. "Do you? You're intrigued because I contradicted you. It's a novel. Exciting, a break from the monotony of universal agreement, but novelty fades. And when it does, you'll lose interest and move on to the next distraction." Preston absorbed this assessment without offense. "You've clearly dealt with wealthy men before." "I've dealt with men. Wealth is just amplification." "Fair." He tucked his hands into his pockets, a surprisingly vulnerable gesture from someone who controlled billions. "But here's what you don't know about me. I haven't been genuinely intrigued by anyone in years. The people in my life are there because they want something from me: access, money, influence. But you walked into that conference room wanting nothing except to do your job well, and when you saw something wrong, you fixed it, regardless of the consequences." His voice softened. "I've forgotten what that looks like. Integrity without agenda, honesty without calculation. I'd like to remember." There was something in his eyes that Danica's survival instincts couldn't categorize. Not hunger exactly, though that was present too. Something lonelier, something lost. She knew she should refuse. Every lesson her mother had taught, every wall she had built, every promise she had made to herself, they all pointed toward polite rejection and professional distance. But something in his eyes looked hungry for something real. "One coffee," she heard herself say. "That's it." Preston's smile widened, and Danica felt the first tremor of what would eventually become an earthquake. They walked to a small cafe 2 blocks from Hawthorne Tower, discussing foundation engineering and load calculations while autumn wind scattered leaves across San Francisco sidewalks. The coffee was unremarkable. The conversation was not. Preston listened with genuine attention, not the performative listening of executives waiting for their turn to speak, but the focused absorption of someone encountering ideas that mattered. Danica found herself relaxing incrementally, her carefully maintained defenses lowering by degrees she didn't notice until they were already compromised. When 2 hours had passed and the cafe began closing for the evening, they both seemed surprised by the vanished time. "I should go," Danica said, reaching for her bag. "Have dinner with me." Preston's request was immediate, almost involuntary. "There's a restaurant nearby." Nothing elaborate, just more of this. She should have said no. She had already exceeded her stated boundaries. One coffee had been the agreement. But boundaries, like promises, sometimes bend under pressure they weren't designed to withstand. "One dinner," she said. That's it. One coffee became a lifeline, but neither of them knew they were building a love story on borrowed time. To understand Preston Edmund Hawthorne III, you must first understand the empire that created him. The Hawthorne dynasty began in the calloused hands of Edmund Charles Hawthorne Sr., a Kentucky coal miner's son who arrived in San Francisco in 1962 with $11, a borrowed suit, and an ambition that bordered on pathological. The story had been sanitized for corporate biographies. The handsome young man from humble origins who built a real estate empire through vision and determination. The truth was considerably less romantic. Edmund Sr. possessed a particular genius for identifying weakness in others and exploiting it without mercy. He bought distressed properties from widows who couldn't afford property taxes. He undercut competitors through methods that skirted legality without quite crossing it. He cultivated relationships with city officials through generosity that expected and received favorable treatment in return. By 1975, Hawthorne Development Corporation owned significant portions of downtown San Francisco. By 1985, the company had expanded into commercial development across 3 states. By the time Edmund Sr. died in 1992, the Hawthorne family fortune exceeded $2 billion. His son, Edmund Jr., proved a competent steward but an uninspired leader. The empire maintained its position without expanding it. Edmund Jr. seemed content to manage what his father had built rather than building anything new. But Edmund Jr. married brilliantly. Genevieve Margot Caldwell came from Boston money, old money, the kind that considered the Hawthornes nouveau riche despite their billions. She was educated at Wellesley, possessed a law degree from Harvard she had never used professionally, and carried herself with the particular confidence of a woman who had never encountered a room she couldn't dominate. Where Edmund Jr. was cautious, Genevieve was bold. Where he hesitated, she acted. Within 5 years of their marriage, she had effectively assumed control of Hawthorne Development, strategic direction, while allowing her husband the comfortable fiction of leadership. She expanded aggressively into international markets. She diversified holdings into technology, manufacturing, and financial services. She transformed a successful real estate company into a diversified conglomerate that touched nearly every sector of the American economy. And in 1983, she gave birth to Preston Edmund Hawthorne III. From his first breath, Preston was not a child. He was an investment, a legacy carrier, the vessel through which Hawthorne greatness would extend into another generation. His nursery was designed by an interior architect who specialized in developmental psychology, every color and texture selected to optimize cognitive growth. His nannies were required to hold advanced degrees in early childhood education. His toys were chosen for their educational value rather than their entertainment potential. By 3, Preston could read. By 5, he was studying Mandarin with a private tutor. By 7, he attended the most exclusive preparatory academy in Northern California, where his classmates included children of senators, technology founders, and European aristocrats. Summers were not for leisure. They were for enrichment, coding camps in Silicon Valley, leadership programs in Switzerland, cultural immersion experiences in Tokyo and London and Dubai. Every moment was scheduled, evaluated, optimized for maximum return on the considerable investment Genevieve was making in her son's development. Preston excelled. Of course he did. Excellence was the only acceptable outcome in the Hawthorne household. Anything less than first place was a failure. Anything less than perfect was inadequate. Genevieve had no interest in raising a child. She was engineering an heir. Stanford University accepted Preston's application the winter of his senior year. He graduated summa cum laude, with a degree in finance and a minor in architectural design, a nod to his personal interests that Genevieve had permitted as long as it didn't interfere with his primary trajectory. Stanford Business School followed, where Preston consistently ranked at the top of his cohort while building a network of future power brokers who would serve the Hawthorne empire for decades to come. Every privilege imaginable was his: private jets, unlimited expense accounts, access to circles of influence that most people never knew existed. But privilege came with a price: expectations, scrutiny, conditional love. Edmund Jr. died suddenly when Preston was 27, a massive stroke that took him between the first and second holes of his regular Thursday golf game. The funeral was attended by governors and CEOs and society figures who had considered Edmund Jr. a pleasant if unremarkable man. Preston grieved privately, uncertain whether he mourned his father or simply the idea of having had one. Preston joined Hawthorne Development Corporation officially at 24, though he had been working summers and holidays since his 16th birthday. His title was Vice President of Strategic Development, a position created specifically for him, designed to provide authority while keeping him firmly under his mother's supervision. Genevieve, now in her early 60s but showing no signs of relinquishing control, treated Preston, his professional development with the same relentless precision she applied to everything. Every decision he made was reviewed, analyzed, critiqued. Every relationship he formed was evaluated for strategic value to the family enterprise. Business associates were acceptable if they brought useful connections. Personal relationships were acceptable if they enhanced the Hawthorne brand. Romantic attachments were acceptable only if they met a rigorous set of criteria: appropriate family background, suitable education, compatible social standing, and most importantly, willingness to subordinate personal identity to the demands of the dynasty. Preston dated the daughters of board members and the sisters of business partners. These women understood the arrangement. They knew that marriage into the Hawthorne family was a transaction, not a romance. They were prepared to play their roles, hosting charity events, producing appropriately, accomplished children, maintaining the polished image that generational wealth required. By 30, Preston had ended 3 such arrangements. The women were interchangeable in their perfection: beautiful, accomplished, understanding, and utterly empty. "You're too selective," Genevieve observed during one of their weekly dinners at the family estate in Pacific Heights. Eleanor Ashworth was entirely suitable. Her family's connections in European markets would have been invaluable. "I didn't love her, Mother." Genevieve's expression suggested he had just spoken in a foreign language. "Love is a luxury, Preston. Compatibility is a requirement. Surely Stanford taught you the difference between emotional indulgence and strategic partnership." Preston had no response. There was never any response that Genevieve would accept. By every metric that mattered to his family, Preston Edmund Hawthorne III was an extraordinary success. He had closed deals worth billions. He had expanded the company's footprint into South American markets. He had earned the respect, or at least the deference, of every major player in international development. But inside, Preston was drowning. He had never been allowed to fail. He had never been allowed to choose. He had never been allowed to want something simply because he wanted it. His life was a performance staged for an audience of one, his mother, whose approval was the only currency that mattered, and whose love was measured in performance reviews rather than affection. Every accomplishment was met not with celebration, but with expectations for the next accomplishment. Every success was simply the baseline for greater success to follow. At 31, Preston could close a billion-dollar acquisition without raising his pulse. He could address rooms of intimidating executives without a tremor of uncertainty. He could navigate the treacherous waters of international business with the confidence of someone raised for exactly this purpose. But he could not answer a simple question. Who was he outside the Hawthorne name? He had no hobbies that weren't professionally advantageous, no friendships that weren't strategically valuable, no desires that hadn't been pre-approved by the machinery of the dynasty. He was a role rather than a person, a function rather than an individual. The penthouse apartment that overlooked the San Francisco skyline felt less like a home than a holding cell. The women who passed through his life felt less like partners than props. The success that surrounded him felt less like achievement than obligation. Preston Hawthorne had everything except himself. And then he walked into that conference room and met a woman in a modest blazer, who corrected his soil composition calculations without a moment's hesitation. One coffee became dinner that first evening. Dinner became a standing Wednesday appointment that neither of them officially acknowledged. Wednesday appointments expanded to include weekend afternoons, then evening, phone calls, then text conversations that stretched past midnight. For 8 months, Preston lived a double life. In the marble-floored corridors of Hawthorne Tower, he remained the heir apparent. Decisive, strategic, performing his role with the precision his mother demanded. He attended board meetings and investor presentations and the endless cycle of corporate obligations that consumed most of his waking hours. But when he stepped outside those corridors, when he crossed the bay to Oakland, or met Danica at obscure restaurants in neighborhoods his driver had to look up. He became someone else entirely. With Danica, Preston could breathe. He took her to the expensive restaurants his world expected, the Michelin-starred establishments where sommeliers addressed him by name and chefs emerged from kitchens to personally present tasting menus. But he also discovered, through her, an entirely different geography of pleasure. Hole-in-the-wall taco shops in the Mission District where the owner's grandmother made fresh tortillas every morning, Ethiopian restaurants in Oakland where they ate with their hands and laughed at their own clumsiness, Vietnamese bakeries in San Jose where coffee cost $2 and the food was better than anything served at his exclusive clubs. Danica introduced him to the real Oakland, not the gentrifying neighborhoods where developers like himself were transforming working-class communities into luxury condominiums, but the Oakland that still remembered what it was before money arrived. She showed him murals painted by local artists on warehouse walls. She took him to community jazz sessions in church basements. She walked him through her old neighborhood, pointing out the apartment where she'd lived with Claudine, the corner store where she'd bought candy as a child, the park where she'd learned to ride a bicycle. Preston absorbed these experiences with the wonder of a traveler discovering a new continent. This was life without performance, pleasure without purpose, existence without optimization. Their conversations stretched into hours, then into days, rooftop discussions that began at sunset and continued until the sky turned pink with dawn. Arguments about architecture and philosophy and the responsibilities of wealth. Confessions whispered in the darkness of her modest Oakland apartment, where the sheets cost less than his pocket squares and the happiness was worth more than his entire portfolio. "You're different when you're here," Danica observed one evening, tracing patterns on his bare chest, while the city hummed below her window. "Less rigid, more human. I'm more myself here than anywhere," Preston admitted. "It's the only place where no one expects me to be anything except present. That's a terrible way to live." I know. He was falling in love. Not the strategic affection his mother would have approved, the calculated partnership of compatible dynasties, but something messier, more dangerous, more real. He was falling for a woman who challenged him, who saw through his performances, who demanded nothing from him except honesty. With Danica, Preston discovered that he had opinions about things that didn't affect stock prices. He had preferences that weren't focus grouped. He had a sense of humor that emerged only when no one was evaluating his social performance. He had vulnerability, something he had been trained to eliminate but which surfaced. In her presence, like water finding its way through cracks in stone. He fell in love slowly, then all at once. And the fall terrified him. 8 months. 243 days, countless hours of conversation, intimacy, connection, and in all that time, Danica never met his mother. She never attended company events. She was never introduced to board members or business partners or the constellation of important people who populated Preston's professional universe. She existed in the margins of his life, precious but invisible, cherished but unacknowledged. Preston told himself this was for her protection. His world was brutal. The people who surrounded him were skilled at identifying weakness and exploiting it. If his mother discovered that he was seeing a woman who didn't meet her criteria, a woman of modest means, ordinary background, no strategic value to the dynasty, she would move to eliminate the relationship with the same efficiency she applied to hostile acquisitions. But honesty, when it finally arrived, was less flattering. He wasn't protecting Danica. He was protecting himself. He was afraid of confrontation, afraid of choosing between the woman he loved and the family that had shaped his entire identity, afraid of discovering that when forced to decide, he might not choose correctly. He was afraid his mother would disapprove. He was right. Genevieve Margot Hawthorne had surveillance on her son that went beyond simple parental concern. Her network of informants, assistants, drivers, building security personnel reported on Preston's activities with the thoroughness of intelligence operatives. She knew about the Oakland apartment. She knew about the woman who occupied it. She was simply waiting for the appropriate moment to intervene. But Preston remained oblivious to this scrutiny Too intoxicated by newfound happiness to notice the gathering storm, he continued meeting Danica in hidden corners of the Bay Area, continued living his compartmentalized existence, and continued believing that he could maintain both worlds indefinitely. Danica, for her part, said nothing about the arrangement. She had been raised to expect nothing from others. If Preston wanted to keep her separate from his official life, she would accept that boundary the way she had accepted every limitation life had imposed. But acceptance and understanding were different things. Late at night, when Preston had returned to his Pacific Heights penthouse, and she was alone in her Oakland apartment, Danica stared at the ceiling and wondered what it meant to love a man who kept you hidden. Was she a sanctuary or a secret? Was she precious or simply convenient? She didn't ask these questions aloud. She was too proud to seek reassurance. But the questions existed nonetheless, accumulating like sediment at the bottom of a clear stream. I want to pause here and speak directly to you. If you've ever loved someone who kept you hidden, drop a comment below. Let me know if you've ever been someone's secret, because Danica's story might be closer to your own than you think. Maybe you were the person they saw on weeknights, but never introduced to their friends. Maybe you were the phone call they answered in private but ignored in public. Maybe you gave your whole heart to someone who gave you only the parts of their life they could afford to share. That experience leaves marks. I know it does. And if that's you, I want you to know your story matters. Your feelings are valid, and you deserve more than the margins of someone else's life. Hit that like button right now if this story is hitting home. The algorithm needs to know that these stories matter, and every like helps. More people find their way to narratives that speak to their experience. Now, let me tell you what happened next. 8 months of hidden happiness. 8 months of stolen moments and secret conversations and love that existed only in the spaces between obligations. 8 months of Preston believing he could maintain this balance indefinitely. He was wrong. Love needed space to survive, and Preston's world had no space for a woman like Danica. His mother's patience was not infinite. His ability to compartmentalize was not sustainable, and the universe, in its particular cruelty, was about to present him with a choice he had spent his entire life avoiding. But fate was about to force his hand. Tuesday morning, October 17th, 6:47 a.m. Danica Marie Wells sat on the cold tile floor of her Oakland apartment. Bathroom, back pressed against the bathtub, knees drawn to her chest. In her right hand, she held a small plastic stick that had just rewritten her entire future. 2 pink lines. She had been staring at them for 20 minutes, as if prolonged observation might somehow change their configuration. But the lines remained stubbornly present, stubbornly parallel, stubbornly, announcing a truth her body had been whispering for weeks. Her hands were shaking. Not violently, just a persistent tremor that made the test results blur slightly if she didn't focus. Her mind raced through calculations that had nothing to do with architecture or engineering. I am 31 years old, junior designer at a small firm, barely making rent on a 1-bedroom apartment in a neighborhood that gentrification hadn't quite reached, in love with a man who visited her life like a tourist, but never stayed long enough to unpack. Pregnant. The word sat heavy in her consciousness, rearranging everything it touched. Every plan she had made, every trajectory she had plotted, every careful boundary she had constructed, all of it shifted to accommodate this new reality growing inside her. She should have been terrified. By any logical assessment, this was a disaster. An unplanned pregnancy with a man who couldn't acknowledge her publicly, a child she couldn't afford, a responsibility she hadn't sought. But as Danica placed her left hand on her stomach, still flat, still giving no external indication of the revolution occurring within, she felt something unexpected. Peace, not the absence of fear, but something deeper. A certainty that transcended circumstances. This child, this impossible, inconvenient, unplanned child, was not a mistake. This was a beginning. She thought of Claudine, who had raised her alone after Thomas walked away. Her mother had never complained, never expressed regret, never suggested that single motherhood had stolen something from her life. Instead, Claudine had treated Danica's existence like a gift that required no giver. "You were my miracle," Claudine had said once during one of their late-night phone conversations. "Not because of how you arrived, but because of who you became." Danica understood that now. Understood it with a clarity that cut through every complication, every fear, every reasonable objection. She was going to be a mother. The only question remaining was whether Preston Hawthorne would choose to be a father. Danica called Preston at 9 a.m., after she had showered, dressed and arranged her thoughts into something resembling order. "Can you come over?" she asked when he answered on the third ring. "Today, as soon as possible. Is everything all right?" His voice carried the particular tension of someone accustomed to crisis management. "You sound... I need to see you. In person. I have a board meeting at 11, but I could..." "Preston," she interrupted him gently but firmly. "This is more important than your board meeting." A pause. Then, "I'll be there in an hour." He arrived in 53 minutes, which meant he had likely broken several traffic laws crossing the bay. Danica had made tea, chamomile for herself, Earl Grey for him. She had cleaned her already clean apartment, adjusted and readjusted the kitchen chairs, and practiced 17 different ways to deliver news that had no perfect delivery method. When Preston walked through her door, she abandoned all 17 options. They sat at her tiny kitchen table, the one she had purchased at a garage sale, and refinished herself. The morning light filtered through her single window, casting geometric patterns across Preston's concerned face. He looked polished as always, navy suit, platinum watch, shoes that cost more than her monthly salary. But there was something vulnerable in his posture, as if he could sense the approach of something he couldn't negotiate away. "I'm pregnant." The words hung between them like a physical presence. Preston's hand, reaching for his tea, stopped midway. His face cycled through expressions too quickly for Danica to catalogue. Surprise, confusion, something that might have been fear. The silence that followed contained everything. 10 seconds. 20. 30. Finally, Preston spoke. "Are you sure?" It was the wrong first question, and they both knew it. "Yes," Danica replied. 3 tests, all positive. Another silence. Preston's hand completed its journey to the teacup, but he didn't drink, just held it, as if the ceramic might provide stability his world suddenly lacked. "What are we going to do?" "We." At least he had said we. But the question itself revealed everything Danica needed to know about Preston's emotional state. He was treating this like a problem to be solved, a crisis to be managed, a complication to be negotiated. Not a child, not the future, not a possibility for joy. "I'm keeping the baby," Danica said. "I wanted you to know. I thought you deserved to know." Preston set down his tea with excessive care. When he looked at her, his grey eyes held the particular panic of a man watching his carefully controlled existence fragment. "My mother is going to..." He stopped, started again. "I need to think about this. I need time to process, to figure out how to handle..." "Handle?" Danica's voice remained level, but something inside her chest was cracking like ice under pressure. "That's not what I meant. This changes everything. You understand that, right? Everything I've built, everything my family expects, everything you've built," Danica repeated. "Your family expects? What about what you want, Preston? What about what we've built?" He stood abruptly, the chair scraping against her floor. For a moment, she thought he might simply leave. Instead, he walked to her window, staring out at the Oakland morning, as if the answer might be written in the traffic patterns below. "I love you," he said to the glass. "You know I love you. I know you love me in private. I know you love me between meetings and after hours and in spaces where your mother can't see. But is that enough love for a child, Preston? Is that enough love for a family?" He turned to face her, and she saw it clearly. The war between the man he wanted to be and the man he had been trained to remain. But wars require courage, and Preston's courage had always been situational, professional, limited to boardrooms and contracts. He crossed to her, kissed her forehead with devastating gentleness, and said the words that would echo in her mind for the next decade. "I need to think about this." Then he left. Danica sat at her kitchen table for an hour after Preston's departure, her tea growing cold, her heart growing colder. She didn't cry. Tears would have been easier than the crystalline clarity that settled over her like morning frost. She understood now. Understood with the brutal honesty that pregnancy, hormones and abandoned tea demanded, exactly who Preston Hawthorne was. Not a bad man. Not cruel or careless or deliberately harmful. Just weak. Weak in the specific way that wealth often creates, an inability to choose discomfort, to risk disapproval, to stand against the machinery that had shaped him. Preston would always love her, she believed that. But his love would always come with conditions, with boundaries, with careful limitations designed to prevent it from disrupting his real life. And a child could not live in the margins. A child could not be a secret visited between board meetings. A child deserved to be claimed, celebrated, chosen without reservation or qualification. If Preston couldn't stand up now when it mattered most, now when new life demanded courage, he never would. Danica placed her hand on her stomach again, feeling the promise of the person growing within. Her child would not spend life waiting for their father to find his courage. Her child would not learn that love came with conditions and qualifications and careful boundaries. Her child would know only that they were wanted, wholly and completely, by at least one parent who would choose them over everything else. "It's going to be okay," she whispered to the life inside her. "We're going to be okay." She would not raise her child in the shadow of a man who hesitated when he should have rejoiced. 3 days passed. 3 days of silence from Preston. 3 days of Danica going to work, managing projects, pretending that her entire world hadn't shifted on its axis. On the third evening, Friday, October 20th, 6:15 p.m., someone knocked on her apartment door. Danica's heart lurched. Preston had a key but always knocked anyway, a gesture of respect for her space that she had once found endearing. She smoothed her hair, straightened her shoulders, and opened the door. But it wasn't Preston standing in her hallway. It was Genevieve Margot Hawthorne. Preston's mother stood before Danica's threshold like visiting royalty gracing a peasant's hovel. She was immaculate, a tailored cream coat despite the warm evening, pearl earrings that caught the hallway's fluorescent lighting, silver hair arranged in a chignon that had probably required an hour to achieve its appearance of effortlessness. Her face was a masterclass in controlled expression, not hostile, not friendly, simply present with the patience of someone who had never doubted their welcome anywhere. "Miss Wells," she said. Not a greeting, an identification. "May I come in?" It was phrased as a question but delivered as a foregone conclusion. Danica stepped aside, not from politeness but from curiosity. She had wondered when this confrontation would occur. Preston might hesitate, but Genevieve Margot Hawthorne had never hesitated about anything in her life. Genevieve entered the apartment with the measured steps of someone surveying a property for purchase. Her eyes catalogued everything: the second-hand furniture, the cramped kitchen, the single window, the stack of architectural journals that served as both professional reading and coffee table. She settled onto Danica's couch with practiced grace, managing to make the worn furniture appear as if it had failed to meet her standards rather than the reverse. "Would you like tea?" Danica offered, not because she wanted to serve this woman, but because activity felt safer than stillness. "That won't be necessary. This won't take long." Danica sat in the chair across from her uninvited guest, maintaining eye contact, with the determination of someone refusing to yield territory in their own home. "You know who I am," Genevieve began. "I do. Then you know why I'm here." "I can guess." Genevieve's smile was a corporate gesture, designed to appear warm while generating no actual heat. "My son told me about your situation." Situation, not pregnancy, not a grandchild. Situation. "I see. Preston is not ready for fatherhood," Genevieve continued, her tone conversational, almost sympathetic. "He's certainly not ready for marriage, despite what promises he might have made in private moments. The boy, and he is still very much a boy in matters of the heart, has been protected from consequences his entire life. This protection has made him successful in business but utterly unprepared. For the kind of responsibility you're asking him to accept, I haven't asked him for anything. Haven't you? Genevieve's eyebrow rose slightly. You've presented him with a situation that demands action. That is, in itself, a request. She reached into her coat pocket and withdrew a piece of paper, folded once, which she placed on the coffee table between them. I could threaten you, Genevieve said, still maintaining that conversational tone. I could tell you about the lawyers I employ, the investigations I could launch, the custody battles that would exhaust you financially and emotionally before they even reached a courtroom. I could explain how the Hawthorne family resources would bury you in legal procedures until you begged for whatever terms we offered. She paused, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from her coat. But I don't think you're stupid, Miss Wells. I think you're actually quite intelligent. So, instead of threats, I'm offering you a choice. Danica looked at the folded paper, but didn't reach for it. That's a check, Genevieve explained. $100,000. Enough to relocate wherever you choose, start fresh, raise your child without the complications that come with the Hawthorne name. You're trying to buy me off. No, Genevieve corrected. A payoff would be transactional. This is not a payment. It's an option. Take it, and you're free to build whatever life you choose for yourself and your child. Refuse it, and you're choosing a different path, one where you'll spend the next 18 years fighting for scraps of attention from a man who doesn't have the spine to stand up to his mother. The cruelty of the statement was in its accuracy. Danica felt it land like a physical blow, though she kept her expression neutral. I don't want your money. I didn't expect you would, Genevieve acknowledged. Pride is often the luxury of people who haven't yet realized what they're sacrificing for it. She stood with the same measured grace she had displayed throughout the visit. Keep the check. Think about it. And while you're thinking, consider this. You're not the first woman to believe she could change Preston. You're not even the third. But you might be the first. One intelligent enough to recognize that people don't change. They just reveal who they've always been. She moved toward the door, then paused. Think about the man Preston is now, not the man you hope he'll become. Then ask yourself if that's the father you want for your child. Genevieve left without waiting for a response, closing the door behind her with a soft click that somehow echoed in the small apartment. The check remained on Danica's coffee table for 3 days, untouched but impossible to ignore. $100,000. She didn't want it. The very sight of it made her feel complicit in something shameful, but she couldn't bring herself to tear it up either. It sat there like a question mark, forcing her to confront truths she had been avoiding. Genevieve's words, cruel, calculated, but ultimately honest, replayed in her mind during quiet moments. Think about the man Preston is now, not the man you hope he'll become. The man Preston was now had left her apartment without joy at the news of their child. The man Preston was now had disappeared for 3 days rather than face the implications of their relationship. The man Preston was now had told his mother about her pregnancy before deciding what he wanted to do about it. Danica thought about her own childhood, about watching Thomas Wells drive away, about the hole his absence had carved in her young heart. She had survived it. Claudine had made sure of that. But survival and happiness were different things. Her child deserved more than survival. Her child deserved to be celebrated, not negotiated. Preston called on the 4th day, his voice careful and measured through the phone. "I've been thinking," he began. "So have I," Danica interrupted. "And I've made a decision. Can we talk in person? I could come over." "No." The word came out sharper than intended. "No, Preston. We're done talking. Danica, please. I know I handled things badly, but you handled things exactly as I should have expected. And your mother helped me understand that." "My mother? She contacted you?" "She visited, with an offer, and some clarity." Preston's silence spoke volumes about conversations that had occurred in rooms Danica would never enter. Whatever she said, she was right. Danica cut him off. "About you. About us. About everything. That's not fair." "Fair?" Danica laughed, but there was no humor in it. Fair would be you choosing us without hesitation. Fair would be you standing up to your mother instead of reporting to her. Fair would be you being the man I fell in love with instead of the heir you were trained to be. I love you. I know, Danica said softly. But you love your comfort more. She hung up before he could respond. That night, Danica made 3 decisions. First, she would leave Oakland. Not because Genevieve had suggested it, but because staying meant watching Preston from a distance, meant running into reminders and explaining to her child why their father lived in the same city but never visited. Second, she would not take the money. She would make her own way, as she always had. Third, she would disappear completely. No forwarding address, no contact information, no possibility of Preston finding her if he ever developed the courage to try. Danica refused to beg for a place in someone's life, and she refused to teach her child that love meant accepting whatever scraps someone was willing to throw. The next 7 days passed in a blur of preparation. Resignations submitted at Morrison and Reyes. Apartment lease broken. Possessions sorted into categories: essential, sellable, disposable. Claudine, when told of the plan, asked only one question. Are you sure? I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Then I support you. Always. Portland, Oregon was chosen for its distance, far enough to prevent casual contact, close enough that Claudine could visit. Danica had a cousin there who could help with initial arrangements. The architecture scene was smaller than Oakland's, but she would manage. She always had. Within a week, Danica Marie Wells would vanish, and she would take Preston Hawthorne's only chance at redemption with her. The conversation with Claudine Renee Wells lasted 2 hours and required no justification. I'm leaving Oakland, Mama. Tonight. Claudine's voice through the phone carried no surprise, only the steady acceptance of a woman who had made similar choices in her own life. Where will you go? Portland. Cousin Marie said she has a room I can rent until I find something permanent. And Preston won't know where I am, won't be able to find me, won't be part of this child's life. A pause. Then, are you running from him or protecting yourself? Both, Danica admitted. But mostly I'm protecting this baby from growing up as someone's secret, from learning that love comes with conditions and qualifications, from waiting for a father who might never find the courage to show up completely. Then you're doing the right thing, baby girl. Hard things and right things are often the same things. Danica packed methodically, selecting only essentials. 3 suitcases held her entire portable life: clothes, documents, the few pieces of jewelry Claudine had given her over the years, and a single photograph of herself and Preston taken during a weekend in Monterey, when they had both believed their love could overcome any obstacle. She kept the photograph not from sentiment, but as evidence. Proof that she had once believed in something beautiful, even if that belief had proven false. Her phone, the number Preston knew, the device that connected her to their shared history, she left on the kitchen counter of her empty apartment. The landlord would find it when he came to inspect the unit. By then, Danica would be 300 miles north, using a new number purchased with cash at a Portland convenience store. She didn't post forwarding addresses. She didn't update social media profiles she had never maintained. She didn't inform mutual acquaintances who might serve as bridges back to the world she was leaving. Instead, she contacted her 3 freelance clients: a bakery needing website updates, a law firm requiring document design, a non-profit seeking newsletter layouts, and informed them she would be working remotely moving forward. 2 agreed immediately. The third found someone local. It was enough to begin. The drive north began at 2 a.m., Oakland sleeping as Danica navigated empty streets toward Interstate 5. She stopped once for gas in a town whose name she didn't register, filling the tank while her unborn child shifted inside her, already restless, already eager for movement. We're going somewhere better, she whispered, hand on her stomach. Somewhere we can be ourselves without apology. She didn't do it out of spite. She did it out of survival. If Preston wanted to find her, he would have to fight. He would have to choose her over his mother's disapproval, over his comfortable existence, over the path of least resistance he had followed his entire life. And Preston didn't know how to fight for anything that mattered. 7 days after Danica hung up on him, Preston Edmund Hawthorne III stood outside her Oakland apartment, holding a bouquet of white roses that had cost more than most people's weekly groceries. He had spent the week in negotiations, not with boards or investors, but with himself, wrestling with the voices in his head, his mother's disapproval, his father's legacy, his own fears of inadequacy. But beneath all that noise, one truth remained constant. He loved Danica Wells, loved her enough to finally fight for her, to stand up to his mother, to claim his child publicly, proudly, permanently. The roses were merely a beginning. In his jacket pocket was a ring, not the ostentatious diamond his mother would have selected, but a simple band with an emerald that matched the dress Danica had worn on their first official date. He had practiced his speech 17 times during the drive from San Francisco, refining the words until they carried the weight of his transformation. He would apologize. He would propose. He would promise to be the man she deserved and the father their child needed. Preston knocked on her door with the confidence of someone who had finally found his courage. A stranger answered. The man was in his 40s, wearing paint-stained jeans and holding a roller brush. Behind him, Preston could see drop cloths covering floors, furniture already different from what he remembered. "Can I help you?" the stranger asked. "I'm looking for Danica Wells. This is her apartment. Nobody by that name here. I just moved in 3 days ago." Preston's stomach dropped with a particular sensation of someone missing a step in the dark. "That's impossible. She lives here. She's lived here for 3 years." The man shrugged. "The landlord said the previous tenant broke the lease suddenly. I left the place clean, though. No complaints from me." "Did she leave forwarding information? Any indication where she went?" "Friend, I don't know anything about Danica. Like I said, I moved in 3 days ago. You might check with the building manager." The building manager, a perpetually irritated man named Carl, who managed 6 properties with the enthusiasm of someone serving a life sentence, provided no additional information. Tenant Wells vacated October 27th. Lease broken. Security deposit forfeited. No forwarding address provided. But surely she had to give some indication. She didn't have to give anything except 30 days' notice, which she forfeited along with the deposit. Everything is legal. Everything is final. Preston tried her phone. Disconnected. He drove to Morrison and Reyes, where a receptionist he had never met informed him that Danica Wells no longer worked there. "When did she leave?" "I'm not authorized to provide that information. Could I speak with someone who is?" "I'm afraid all personnel matters are confidential." He hired a private investigator, Harrison Locke, former FBI, specialized in missing persons cases. The man took Preston's money and spent 3 weeks following trails that led nowhere. "Your MS Wells was thorough," Locke reported during their final meeting. "No credit card usage under that name, no employment records in the Bay Area, no forwarding mail through USPS. She either left the state or is living completely off the grid. People don't just vanish. People with motivation and intelligence vanish all the time, Mr. Hawthorne. And from what you've told me, Ms. Wells had both." Preston paid the investigator's invoice and didn't hire another. Danica Wells had vanished. For 6 months, Preston searched with decreasing hope. He checked social media platforms she had never used. He called architecture firms throughout Northern California. He even drove to Sacramento, finding Claudine Wells's address through public records. Claudine answered her door wearing scrubs, clearly just home from a hospital shift. She looked at Preston, with eyes that held no surprise and less sympathy. "Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Wells. I'm looking for Danica. I know who you are and what you're looking for. Is she here? Has she contacted you?" Claudine studied him with the clinical assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating pain. "My daughter is a grown woman who makes her own choices. If she wanted you to find her, you wouldn't need to be standing on my doorstep. She's pregnant. With my child. And..." The simple question carried more judgment than any accusation could have. "I want to be involved. I want to be a father." Wanting and doing are different things, Mr. Hawthorne. You had your chance to do it. Now you're left wanting. She closed the door without another word. After 6 months of searching, Preston Hawthorne stopped looking for Danica Wells. He told himself she didn't want to be found. A truth that made the abandonment easier to accept than acknowledging his role in her disappearance. He constructed a narrative where she had chosen to leave, where her vanishing was about her fears rather than his failures. Work became his sanctuary and his prison. He assumed full control of Hawthorne Development Corporation when Genevieve retired at 68, though. Retired meant she simply influenced operations from a distance rather than from the executive suite. Preston transformed into exactly the CEO his mother had always envisioned. Ruthless, brilliant, emotionally impenetrable. The company's value tripled under his leadership. He orchestrated acquisitions that business schools would study for decades. He built towers that redefined skylines in 7 cities. He accumulated wealth that exceeded even his family's historical standards. And he felt nothing. Success was a language he spoke fluently, but which carried no meaning beyond its own expression. Every achievement felt hollow, every victory Pyrrhic. He dated occasionally, women his mother approved of, women who understood that they were auditioning for a role rather than building a relationship. None of them lasted more than 6 months. None of them reached the parts of him that had frozen the day Danica disappeared. He never married. He never had children, at least none he knew about. He never let anyone close enough to hurt him the way her absence hurt him. Something inside him had stopped the day Danica disappeared. Not dramatically. Preston wasn't given to dramatic gestures, but completely. The part of him capable of genuine connection, of vulnerability, of choosing love over safety, had simply stopped functioning. He built an empire. He built nothing else. His penthouse apartment remained a museum to successful solitude. His days followed predictable patterns: work, exercise, carefully controlled social obligations, sleep. He became known for his generous philanthropy, funding hospitals and schools, with the mechanical precision of someone purchasing indulgences. But at night, in the space between consciousness and sleep, Preston sometimes allowed himself to wonder about Danica, about the child who would be walking now, talking now, existing now in some parallel universe he couldn't access. He never searched for them again. But he never stopped looking. Lily Marie Wells was born at 3:47 a.m. on May 15th, in a Portland hospital room where rain drummed against windows and Danica discovered that love could be even more overwhelming than loss. The labor lasted 19 hours. Claudine had wanted to fly up, but her shift supervisor at Sacramento General had denied the time off, and they needed her income too desperately to risk her job. So Danica faced childbirth with only a midwife named Patricia and her cousin Marie who held her hand and whispered encouragement while Danica's body performed its ancient, agonizing miracle. The pain was indescribable, but then Patricia placed a small, squirming body on Danica's chest, and everything else became irrelevant. Lily had Preston's eyes, that precise shade of grey that would shift to blue depending on the light. But everything else was Danica's: the delicate features, the stubborn chin, the full lips that would one day argue brilliantly and smile radiantly. "Hello, beautiful girl," Danica whispered, tears streaming freely for the first time since Preston had left her apartment. "I'm your mama, and you are so wanted." The early years were hard in ways Danica hadn't anticipated. Not the poverty. She had expected that, planned for it, managed it with the same methodical precision she applied to everything. Freelance work provided enough for a small 2-bedroom apartment in the Alberta district. Food, necessities. They didn't have excess, but they had enough. The hard part was the loneliness, not romantic loneliness. Danica had no interest in romance, no energy for anything beyond survival and motherhood. But the particular isolation of raising a child without support, without backup, without anyone to share the wonder and terror of watching a human being develop. Lily's first word was "Mama." Her first steps happened at 11 months, stumbling across their living room toward Danica's outstretched arms. Her first day of preschool resulted in a call from the teacher because Lily had corrected an adult's pronunciation of Tyrannosaurus and refused to apologize for being right. "She's exactly like you," Marie observed during one of her regular visits. brilliant and stubborn, and absolutely convinced she can handle everything herself. "I hope she's better than me," Danica replied, watching 3-year-old Lily construct elaborate towers from blocks, testing architectural principles she couldn't yet name. "I hope she gets all my strength and none of my mistakes." They built their life in careful increments. Danica expanded her freelance business, eventually hiring 2 other designers and establishing a small but reliable firm. Lily grew from infant to toddler to child, each phase bringing new challenges and revelations. When Lily was 5, she asked about her father for the first time. "Where is he?" Danica had prepared for this question, rehearsed answers that were honest without being cruel. "He lives far away." "Why doesn't he visit?" "Because he wasn't ready to be a parent. Some people aren't ready for big responsibilities, and that's okay. But I was ready. I was so ready for you." "Was he sad? When did you leave?" Danica considered the question, owing her daughter honesty even when it hurt. "I don't know, baby. Maybe. But being sad and being ready are different things." Lily absorbed this information with the seriousness of someone processing fundamental truths about existence. "Am I a mistake?" she finally asked. Danica pulled her daughter close, breathing in the scent of children's shampoo and possibility. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me. You were unexpected, but never, never a mistake. You were a surprise, the most beautiful surprise of my life." Lily never pressed further. Even as a child, she possessed an intuition about which questions caused pain and which pain wasn't hers to excavate. They were happy, not perfect. Perfection was neither achievable nor desirable. "But I'm happy." They had Friday movie nights with homemade popcorn, Saturday adventures to Portland's parks and museums, Sunday mornings with pancakes shaped like animals and architectural discussions disguised as games. They had inside jokes and bedtime stories, and the particular intimacy of 2 people facing the world as a united front. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Tuesday, the hour when all terrible news arrives. Claudine had collapsed at work. Stroke. Massive. By the time Danica reached Sacramento, her mother was gone. The funeral was small. Nurses from Sacramento General, a few neighbors. Distant relatives who appeared more from obligation than affection. Lily, now 7, held Danica's hand through the service with the solemnity of someone who understood that grief required witness more than words. "Grandma's not coming back," Lily said that night. Not a question, but a confirmation. "No, baby, she's not." "Are you sad?" "Very sad." "Me too." Lily climbed into Danica's bed, something she hadn't done in over a year. "But we still have each other. Always," Danica promised, holding her daughter close. "We'll always have each other." Losing Claudine meant losing her only real family beyond Lily. It meant losing the one person who had known Danica's whole story, who remembered the scared 7-year-old watching, her father leave, and the determined woman who had chosen single motherhood over a half-life with Preston Hawthorne. But it also brought Danica and Lily closer, if such a thing was possible. They became even more intertwined, even more essential to each other's existence. Marie stepped into the grandmother role as much as geography allowed. She attended school plays and birthday parties, provided babysitting when Danica needed to, worked late, and offered the kind of steady presence that children require to feel secure. 2 years passed. Lily grew from 7 to 9. Danica's business stabilized and expanded. Their apartment in Portland's Alberta district became a true home, walls covered with Lily's artwork, bookshelves overflowing with stories and science, a life built on love rather than wealth. For 10 years, happiness was enough. 6 months before she would write the letter that shattered Preston Hawthorne's world, Danica Wells noticed the headaches. They began subtly, pressure behind her eyes during long design sessions, a dull ache at the base of her skull after client meetings. She dismissed them with the casual disregard of someone who had never had the luxury of hypochondria. Stress from running a small business, lack of sleep from staying up to help Lily with increasingly complex homework. Too many hours staring at computer screens, designing websites and marketing materials. She took ibuprofen and continued working. But the headaches worsened. What started as occasional discomfort became daily battles. Morning pain that coffee couldn't cure, afternoon throbbing that no amount of hydration could ease, evening pressure that made reading to Lily an exercise in hidden suffering. Then came the fatigue. Not normal tiredness. Danica had been tired for 9 years, since the night Lily was born. This was different. This was exhaustion that sleep couldn't touch, weakness that had no explanation, a bone, deep weariness that made climbing their apartment stairs feel like scaling mountains. "You look pale, Mama," Lily observed one morning over breakfast, her grey-blue eyes studying her mother with 9-year-old concern. "Just tired, baby. A big project deadline is coming up." Lily accepted this explanation because children trust their parents to tell them when something is truly wrong. Danica hated lying to her daughter, but the alternative, admitting she didn't know what was happening to her body, seemed worse. The first blackout happened at her desk. One moment she was adjusting color palettes for a restaurant's rebrand. The next, she was on her office floor, her assistant Hannah kneeling beside her with an expression of barely controlled panic. "You just collapsed," Hannah explained. "1 second you were fine, the next you were on the floor. I'm calling an ambulance." "No." Danica struggled to sit up, the world tilting unpleasantly. "No ambulance. I just stood up too fast. Low blood sugar. I forgot to eat lunch." Hannah looked skeptical but helped her to a chair. "This isn't normal, Danica. You need to see a doctor." "I will," Danica promised, having no intention of following through. The second blackout happened at home. Lily found her unconscious in the kitchen, called 911 with the competence of a child who had been raised to handle emergencies. This time, Danica had no choice but to seek medical attention. Dr. Sylvia Morrison was thorough, compassionate, and ultimately devastating in her diagnosis. The tests took 3 weeks. Blood work, MRI scans, CT scans, a biopsy that left Danica with a bandage on her abdomen and a growing certainty that whatever was wrong was not fixable. Dr. Morrison, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands, delivered the news in her office on a Thursday afternoon while rain painted Portland grey. "I'm afraid the news isn't good, Danica." Danica sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap, her expression composed. She had learned long ago that devastating news was best received without emotion. Emotion could come later, in private, where it wouldn't make others uncomfortable. "Tell me, pancreatic cancer, stage 3. It's already spread to your liver and lymph nodes." The words landed like physical objects, each one adding weight to a burden Danica hadn't known she was about to carry. "Treatment options? We can try chemotherapy, but I need to be honest with you. At this stage, treatment would be about buying time, not curing the disease. We're looking at 3 to 6 months with treatment, less without. 3 to 6 months. Lily would turn 10 in 5 months. Danica would not be there to see it. How long before I'm incapacitated?" Dr. Morrison's expression softened further, if such a thing was possible. 2 months, maybe 3, before you'll need significant help. The fatigue will worsen, the pain will increase. We can manage symptoms with medication, keep you comfortable, but I'm dying. Yes, I'm so sorry." Danica nodded, still composed, still controlled. "Thank you for being direct. I appreciate honesty. Is there someone I can call for you? Family? Friends?" "No. Thank you. I need to process this alone." She left the office with a folder of information about hospice care, support groups, and treatment options she would never pursue. The elevator ride to the parking garage took forever and no time at all. The walk to her car felt both endless and instantaneous. She sat in her 10-year-old Honda Civic in the hospital parking lot for an hour. She didn't cry. Tears felt inadequate to the magnitude of what was happening. She didn't scream. Rage required energy she no longer possessed. She didn't bargain with a god she had never quite believed in. Instead, she thought of Lily. Lily, who was at school right now, was probably arguing with her teacher about the proper pronunciation of some obscure word. Lily, who had her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness. Lily, who would be alone in 5 months, 3 months, whenever Danica's body finally surrendered to the cancer consuming it. Lily, who deserved so much more than this. The drive home was automatic, muscle memory navigating familiar streets, while Danica's mind wrestled with impossible questions. Who would raise Lily? Marie would help, had already been helping for 9 years. But Marie had her own family, her own children, her own limitations. She could be an aunt figure, a support system, but not a mother. There were no other relatives. Claudine was gone. Thomas had vanished decades ago, and good riddance. Extended family existed somewhere but were strangers, names on a family tree that had never borne fruit. She could arrange for legal guardianship through the state, but the thought of Lily in foster care made Danica physically ill. Her brilliant, sensitive, extraordinary daughter reduced to a case number, shuffled between homes, losing everything familiar along with losing her mother. No, unacceptable. For the first time in 10 years, Danica allowed herself to think about Preston Edmund Hawthorne III, not with longing or regret. Those emotions had been cremated long ago, but with the practical assessment of a mother considering all options for her child's future. Preston was Lily's biological father. He had rights, whether Danica liked it or not. More importantly, he had resources. Lily would never want anything material. The best schools, the best opportunities, the best chance at a future, beyond what Danica could provide, even if she lived another 50 years. But Preston was also the man who had hesitated when told about her pregnancy, the man who had allowed his mother to attempt buying Danica's disappearance, the man who hadn't fought hard enough or long enough to find them. Could he be a father? A real father, not just a financial provider? Danica didn't know. 10 years was a long time. People changed, or perhaps people revealed who they truly were when circumstances demanded it. But dying women couldn't afford to be particular about their children's futures. For 2 months, Danica said nothing to anyone about her diagnosis. She continued working, though she reduced her client load, citing personal reasons. She continued helping Lily with homework, though she had to rest more frequently. She continued their Friday movie nights and Saturday adventures, though everything required more effort than before, and she wrestled with the question of Preston. Part of her, the proud part, the part that had rebuilt her life from ashes, wanted to maintain the wall she had constructed. Lily didn't need the Hawthorne fortune. She didn't need a father who might disappoint her. She didn't need the complications that would come with sudden wealth and sudden family. Marie could be guardian. They would manage. They always had. But another part, the mother's part, the part that would do anything to protect her child's future, knew this was pride speaking, not wisdom. Didn't Lily deserve to know where she came from? Didn't she deserve the choice Danica had never given her? Didn't she deserve the chance to have a father, even if that father might fail her? The wrestling match continued through sleepless nights and exhausted mornings, through doctor's appointments that confirmed what she already knew. The cancer was advancing, time was diminishing, decisions needed to be made. Finally, Marie forced the issue. They were sitting in Danica's living room while Lily was at a friend's birthday party. Danica had just finished explaining her diagnosis, her options, her fears. Marie had listened without interrupting, processing the news with the steady strength that had made her invaluable these past 9 years. "You have to tell him," Marie said simply. "I don't have to do anything except die," Danica replied, the words harsh but true. "That's exactly why you have to tell him. You're dying, Danica. Lily is about to lose the only parent she's ever known. You can't take away her chance at having another one just because you're angry at him." "I'm not angry at him. I haven't been angry at him for years." "Then what's stopping you?" Danica considered the question, owing Marie the same honesty she had always given. "Fear. I'm afraid he'll fail her the way he failed me. I'm afraid he'll treat her like an obligation instead of a gift. I'm afraid his mother will try to erase me from Lily's memory, make her into some perfect Hawthorne heir instead of the beautiful, complicated person she is." Marie reached across the coffee table, taking Danica's hands in hers. The weight loss was already visible, bones too prominent, skin too loose. "All of those things might happen," Marie acknowledged. "But they might not, and even if they do, Lily is strong. You've raised her to be strong. She won't be erased or transformed or diminished. She'll survive whatever comes, just like you did. What if he doesn't want her? Then she'll have me, and we'll manage. But what if he does want her? What if he's spent 10 years regretting his cowardice? What if he's ready now in ways he wasn't then? Marie squeezed her hands gently. This isn't about Preston deserving anything. It's about Lily deserving the truth, the choice, the chance. Give her that, even if it terrifies you. Danica closed her eyes, feeling the weight of the decision settling over her like a shroud. Marie was right. Lily deserved the truth. Danica wrote the letter by hand over the course of 4 evenings after Lily had gone to bed. The first draft was angry, 10 years of suppressed frustration bleeding through every line. She burned it in the kitchen sink, watching the pages curl and blacken. The second draft was defensive, explanations and justifications for every decision she had made. She tore it into pieces, letting them fall like snow into the recycling bin. The third draft was too clinical, facts without emotion, information without context. She crumpled it into a ball, threw it at the wall, then laughed at the childishness of the gesture. The fourth draft was true, not the whole truth. Some truths were too heavy for letters, but enough truth, essential truth. She told him about Lily, her brilliance, her stubbornness, her grey-blue eyes that carried his genetic signature. She told him about the diagnosis, terminal, advancing, inevitable. She told him about her fear, not of dying but of leaving Lily alone. She did not tell him she had loved him. That truth had died years ago and deserved no resurrection. She did not tell him about the nights she had wondered what if he had chosen differently, what if she had stayed to fight, what if courage had won over fear. Those wonders belonged to no one but her. She simply told him the facts. You have a daughter. I'm dying. She needs you. Everything else was commentary. On the last page, she wrote the words that would eventually reach him in his corner office, 47 floors above San Francisco. She sealed the letter in a plain white envelope, addressed it to Preston Edmund Hawthorne III at Hawthorne Tower, and placed it on her kitchen counter, where it sat for 3 days like an unexploded bomb. On the 4th day, she mailed it. Then she waited. We return now to where we began, Preston Hawthorne in his corner office, 47 floors above. San Francisco, the letter scattered on his Persian rug, his world fundamentally altered. He read it 3 times. The first reading was disbelief. Surely this was some elaborate deception. Some attempt at extortion, some cruel joke played by the universe. The second reading was recognition. The handwriting was Danica's. The voice was Danica's. The stubborn pride barely concealed beneath desperate circumstances was absolutely Danica's. The third reading was devastation. A daughter, Lily, 9 years old. Danica, dying. Pancreatic cancer. 3 to 6 months. The words blurred as something Preston hadn't felt in a decade cracked open in his chest. Grief, guilt, rage, all of it at once, a tsunami of emotion. His carefully controlled existence had no infrastructure to manage. He reached for his phone with trembling fingers, scrolling to a number he rarely called but never deleted. Jonathan Reeves answered on the second ring. Preston's personal attorney, his Stanford roommate, and the closest thing to a true friend he had allowed himself to maintain. Preston, is everything okay? You sound... I have a daughter. The words came out raw, unfiltered. She's 9 years old, and her mother is dying. Silence on the other end. Then, I'm on my way. Don't do anything. Don't call anyone. Just wait. I'll be there in 30 minutes. Preston ended the call and returned to staring at the letter. Lily. Her name was Lily. She had his eyes. She wanted to meet him, and he had approximately 90 days to become the father he should have been for the past 9 years. The letter had been sent. The truth had been spoken. A decade of silence had been shattered by 3 pages of handwritten revelation. Now Preston Hawthorne had a choice that would define not just his future, but the future of a 9-year-old girl who had his eyes and her mother's courage. He could ignore the letter, continue his controlled existence, let lawyers handle whatever legal complications might arise, remain the man his mother had shaped, successful, solitary, safe, Or he could choose differently. He could drive to Portland. He could knock on Danica's door. He could meet his daughter. He could try, however imperfectly, however belatedly, to become the man Danica had once believed he could be. The letter had been sent. The truth had been spoken. Now Preston Hawthorne had a choice: become the man Danica always hoped he could be, or prove that she had been right to run. Jonathan Reeves arrived at Preston's office in 28 minutes, having abandoned his own board meeting mid-presentation. He found Preston exactly where he'd left him during their phone call, sitting behind his desk. The letter spread before him like evidence of a crime or a miracle, depending on perspective. Jonathan read the letter twice, his attorney's mind cataloguing details, while his friend's heart recognized the devastation on Preston's face. "First things first," Jonathan said, shifting into professional mode. "We verify this is real. It's real. It's her handwriting, her voice. Preston, I need you to think like a businessman for 30 seconds. People attempt sophisticated cons all the time. We need confirmation." Within 2 hours, Jonathan had deployed resources that existed in the grey areas between legal and necessary. A private investigator confirmed Danica Wells resided in Portland, Oregon. Public records showed Lily Marie Wells enrolled in 4th grade at a local elementary school. Medical contacts, compensated generously for their discretion, confirmed that a patient matching Danica's description was receiving treatment for advanced pancreatic cancer at Oregon Health and Science University. "It's legitimate," Jonathan confirmed. "You have a daughter. Her mother is terminally ill. The timeline matches. Everything checks out." Preston stood at his office window, watching San Francisco conduct its evening routines below. "I need to go to Portland." "Yes, but not like this. You're in shock. You need a plan." "I need to see them." "Preston." Jonathan moved to stand beside his friend. "You're about to meet a 9-year-old daughter who doesn't know you. You're about to face a woman you haven't seen in a decade, who's dying, who hid your child from you. This isn't a business negotiation. You can't strategize your way through this." Preston turned to face him. "Then what do I do?" "You be honest. You are present. You show up without agenda or expectation, and you accept that you have no control over how this unfolds." Preston's instinct was to prepare anyway. On his desk, he spread out potential gifts for Lily: an iPad, designer clothes, a gold bracelet from Tiffany's that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Jonathan watched him arrange these offerings with increasing concern. "Stop," Jonathan said quietly. "She's my daughter. I want to give her—" "You want to buy her affection. That's your mother's playbook, not yours." Preston stared at the gifts, recognizing the truth in Jonathan's words. Gifts were his mother's language, expensive bribes disguised as affection. He needed to speak Danica's language, Lily's language. But he didn't know what that was. He put the gifts away. For 3 days, Preston rehearsed what he would say. He wrote speeches, discarded them, prepared explanations, abandoned them, created 17 different versions of their first conversation, none of which felt authentic. Finally, at 5 a.m. on the 4th day, he stopped preparing. He called Margaret, his executive assistant. "I need you to clear my calendar for next week, maybe longer." "Sir, you have the Singapore delegation on Thursday, the board meeting on—" "Cancel them, reschedule them. I don't care. Family emergency." Margaret, who had worked for the Hawthorne family for 34 years, had never heard Preston use the word family with anything approaching emotion. "Of course, Mr. Hawthorne. I'll handle everything." He drove himself to Portland, refusing the company driver, refusing the corporate jet, refusing every buffer between himself and what waited. The 5-hour drive gave him time to think, to remember, to realize how thoroughly unprepared he was for what came next. While Preston drove north on Interstate 5, Genevieve Margot Hawthorne sat in her Pacific Heights study reviewing quarterly reports with the focused intensity of someone who had never truly retired. Her phone buzzed. Victor Cross, Hawthorne Corporation's chief operating officer, and Genevieve is carefully placed informant within her son's administration. "Mrs. Hawthorne, You asked to be informed of any unusual behavior from Preston. Go on. He cleared his entire calendar. Claimed family emergency. He's been absent for 3 days, and Margaret just informed senior staff he'll be gone indefinitely. Genevieve set down her reading glasses with deliberate calm. Where did he go? Margaret claims not to know, but his car's GPS shows Portland, Oregon. Portland. Genevieve ended the call without farewell. She sat in her study, surrounded by portraits of 4 generations of Hawthorne patriarchs, and felt the familiar sensation of a threat approaching her carefully maintained kingdom. She had believed that particular problem had been eliminated a decade ago. The Wells woman had disappeared, which was payment enough. The crisis had been averted, the bloodline protected, the inappropriate liaison terminated. But now, Preston was in Portland. And Genevieve knew with the certainty of someone who had spent 70 years, reading patterns that the past had returned to threaten the future. She picked up her phone again, scrolling to a number she hadn't called in years. Mr. Garrison, Genevieve Hawthorne, I need you to handle something delicate. Immediately, Richard Garrison, attorney for the kind of problems that never saw courtrooms. Listened to his client's requirements with professional detachment. The Hawthorne legacy would be protected. Again, Preston stood outside apartment 247B in a building that had seen better decades. The hallway smelled of cooking oil and laundry detergent. Children's voices echoed from somewhere above. A television played too loudly through thin walls. This was where his daughter had grown up, where Danica had built a life without him, where his absence had been a defining presence for 9 years. His hand rose to knock, then fell, rose again, fell again. 10 years collapsed into this moment. Every choice, every failure, every moment of cowardice had led to this threshold. Behind this door waited his daughter, a stranger who carried his DNA. Behind this door waited Danica, dying, having summoned him not from love but from necessity. He knocked. Footsteps approached. The door opened, but it wasn't Danica who answered. A woman in her mid-30s stood before him, wearing jeans and a Portland State University sweatshirt. Her expression suggested she knew exactly who he was and had opinions about his arrival. Preston Hawthorne, she said, not a question. Yes. You are? Marie Vance, Danica's cousin, Lily's emergency contact. The person who's been here while you've been elsewhere. The accusation was subtle but present. Preston absorbed it without defense. Is Danica? She's in the bedroom. She's weak today. But she's expecting you. Marie stepped aside, allowing Preston entry into an apartment that was smaller than his office bathroom. But every surface was clean, every item carefully placed. The walls held photographs, Lily at various ages, Danica and Lily together, an older woman Preston recognized as Claudine. No photos of him. His absence was the loudest presence in the room. Marie gestured toward a short hallway. Last door on the left. Lily's at school until 3. You have 2 hours. Preston walked down the hallway on legs that felt disconnected from his body. The bedroom door was partially open. He knocked softly. Come in. Danica's voice, changed but unmistakable. Preston entered the bedroom and stopped breathing. Danica sat propped against pillows in a bed that had seen better years. The cancer had taken weight from her. She was angular now where she had once been soft. Her hair, once thick and lustrous, was thin and brittle. Her skin carried the particular pallor of serious illness. But her eyes, those deep brown eyes that had first challenged him in a corporate conference room, remained sharp, alert, uncompromised. You came, she said. You didn't think I would. No, I wasn't sure you had it in you. The honesty was brutal and deserved. Preston remained in the doorway, uncertain whether he had permission to enter further. You can come in, Danica said. I'm dying, not contagious. He crossed to a chair beside her bed, movements careful, as if sudden motion might shatter whatever fragile moment this was. They studied each other across a decade of absence. 10 years of living, loving, growing, failing. Fragile moment this was. They studied each other across a decade of absence. 10 years of living, loving, growing, failing, all of it written in the lines of their faces. The set of their shoulders, the careful distance they maintained even in proximity. "You look successful," Danica observed. "The photos in business magazines don't do you justice." "You've seen photos?" "Lily Googles you sometimes. When she thinks I'm not watching." "Lily." The name sat between them like a living thing. "Tell me about her," Preston said. "No." Danica's refusal was immediate. "You'll meet her. You'll form your own impressions. I won't color them with my observations." Silence stretched, filled with everything they weren't saying. Finally, Preston did something he hadn't planned, hadn't rehearsed, hadn't prepared for. He slid from the chair to his knees beside her bed, not in supplication but in surrender. "I'm sorry." The words came raw, unfiltered. "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough. I'm sorry I let you go. I'm sorry I chose the easy path when you needed me to choose the right one." Danica watched him with those sharp eyes, reading truths that Preston probably didn't know he was revealing. "I'm sorry for 10 years of absence," he continued. "For every birthday I missed, every milestone I wasn't there for, every moment she needed a father and had only questions." "Stop." Danica's voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. "I didn't ask you here for apologies. Your guilt is your burden to carry, not mine to absolve. I asked you here for Lily." "I know. Do you? Because if you're here to perform grief, to play the reformed father for a few weeks until I'm gone, then leave now. She doesn't need that. She doesn't deserve that. What does she need? A father, a real one. Not a checkbook, not a name on a trust fund, not weekend visits between business trips. A father who shows up for science fairs and bad dreams and Wednesday afternoons when nothing special is happening except life. I don't know how to do that." "Then learn." "What if I fail?" Danica's expression softened slightly. "You probably will, multiple times. But failure while trying is better than absence. She can forgive mistakes. She can't forgive abandonment. Like you can't forgive mine. I forgave you years ago, Preston. Not for your sake, for mine. Carrying anger takes energy, and I've had none to spare." Before Preston could respond, they heard the apartment door open. Voices, Marie's low murmur and a child's higher tones. "She's home early," Danica said. "Teacher into service day. I forgot." Preston stood, suddenly panicked. "What do I say?" "The truth. She values honesty above everything else. She gets that from both of us." Footsteps in the hallway. A knock on the bedroom door. "Mama?" Marie said, "Someone's here." "Come in, baby." The door opened, and Preston Hawthorne met his daughter. Lily Marie Wells was small for 9, with Danica's delicate build. But her eyes, those were absolutely his. Grey-blue, shifting like storm clouds, carrying an intelligence that seemed to see through surfaces to structures beneath. She wore a school uniform, plaid skirt, white polo shirt, navy cardigan. Her backpack, covered in patches from various Portland museums, hung from one shoulder. Her hair was pulled into 2 neat braids that Danica had probably struggled to complete that morning. She looked at Preston with the studied assessment of a child who had learned to evaluate strangers quickly and accurately. "Lily," Danica said softly, "this is Preston. He's your father." Lily absorbed this information without visible reaction. She set down her backpack, walked to her mother's bedside, and kissed Danica's forehead with practiced gentleness. Only then did she turn to fully face Preston. "You're the man who wasn't ready." The words landed like a physical blow. Preston felt them in his chest, his throat, his shame. "Yes," he managed. "I was. And I'm sorrier than you'll ever know." Lily considered this with the same careful evaluation she'd applied to his presence. "Mama says sorry doesn't fix things. It just acknowledges they're broken. Your mother is right. She usually is." A pause. Preston found himself being examined by eyes that were genetically his but spiritually entirely Danica's. "Why now?" Lily asked. "Why come now when Mama's sick? Why not before, when we were okay?" Preston looked at Danica, who offered no help. This was his test to pass or fail. "Because I didn't know you existed until 4 days ago." Lily turned to her mother. "You didn't tell him?" "No, baby, I didn't." Why? Because I was afraid. People make bad choices when they're afraid. Lily absorbed this, processing information with a maturity that no 9-year-old should require. Were you afraid of him specifically, or what he represented? Danica smiled slightly at the question's sophistication. Both, but mostly what he represented. Complication, conflict, a world where you might have been treated as less than the miracle you are. Lily nodded, then returned her attention to Preston. So, you've known for 4 days? Yes. And you're here now? Yes. What happens when Mama dies? The bluntness was shocking, but Preston recognized it as Danica's influence. Truth over comfort, clarity over kindness. I don't know, Preston admitted, but I want to be your father, if you'll let me. Want and will are different things. Yes, they are. Mama wanted to tell you, but she didn't. You want to be my father, but will you? I will. The words came without hesitation. I will make mistakes. I will disappoint you sometimes. I will need your patience while I learn. But I will be your father. I will show up. I will stay. Lily studied him for another long moment. Then she made a decision that would have seemed small to outside observers, but that Preston recognized as monumentally generous. Okay, we can try. The days that followed established a pattern that had no precedent in Preston's experience. He arrived each morning at 9 after Lily left for school. He sat with Danica while she had energy, talking or sitting in silence depending on her strength. They didn't discuss the past. That was settled, finished, irrelevant. They discussed Lily, her preferences, her fears, her allergies, her dreams, the practical transfer of parental knowledge from someone who had it to someone who needed it. At 3, Lily returned from school. This was Preston's time to attempt connection with a daughter who had inherited both parents' skepticism and self-protection. She didn't make it easy, nor should she have. What's your favorite color? He asked on the second day. Why? So you can buy me things in that color and pretend you know me? No. So I can know one true thing about you. Purple, but not light purple. Deep purple, like eggplant. Thank you for telling me. It's just a color. It's a start. She tested him constantly. Small challenges designed to reveal character. My science teacher says climate change is exaggerated. I told her she was wrong. She gave me detention. What did you do? I brought her 3 peer-reviewed studies and asked her to show me her sources. And, she said, I was being disrespectful. Were you? I was being accurate. If that's disrespectful, then yes. Preston smiled. The first genuine smile since arriving in Portland. You're definitely my daughter. Genetics don't make you my father. Showing up does. Then I'll keep showing up. We'll see. But gradually, incrementally, something began to build between them. Not trust. That would take years if it came at all. But possibility. The chance that Preston might become what he should have been all along. He didn't perform for her. He didn't strategize or optimize or attempt to manage outcomes. He simply appeared day after day, trying to learn who this brilliant, guarded child was beneath her careful defenses. He helped with homework, discovering she was 2 grade levels ahead in mathematics, but struggled with creative writing. I don't understand making things up, she complained. Why write about things that didn't happen? Because sometimes fiction tells truths that facts can't capture. That doesn't make sense. Your mother used to say the same thing. A pause. Then tell me something about her. From before. She corrected my math in front of 40 executives the first time we met. What did you do? I fell in love with her. That's not a logical response to criticism. Love rarely is logical. Lily considered this. Is that why it fails so often? Because people try to apply logic to something fundamentally illogical. Preston looked at his 9-year-old daughter discussing love like a philosophy professor and felt something crack open in his chest. Maybe. Or maybe it fails when people choose logic over love, like you did. Exactly like I did. 2 weeks passed in this strange new rhythm. Preston arranged to work remotely, managing his empire from a laptop in Danica, Liz's living room, while learning to braid hair and pack school lunches. Genevieve called repeatedly. He didn't answer. The board expressed concern. He ignored them. For the first time in 41 years, Preston Hawthorne was exactly where he needed to be. Danica grew weaker daily. The medication kept pain manageable, but couldn't stop the disease's progression. She slept more, spoke less, but watched Preston with Lily constantly, evaluating, assessing, deciding whether her gamble would pay off. "She's warming to you," Danica said one evening while Lily was in the shower. "She's tolerating me. For Lily, that's warming. I want to do right by her. Then don't be you. Be who you could have been if you'd chosen differently 10 years ago. I don't know who that person is. Then invent him. Become him. Choose him every day until choosing becomes a habit." Preston Hawthorne was finally learning to fight. Not in boardrooms with contracts and calculations, but in a small Portland apartment with patience and presence. He was learning that love wasn't a negotiation but a surrender. That fatherhood wasn't a role but a revolution. But the real enemy wasn't guilt or lost time. The real enemy had been watching from San Francisco, waiting for the right moment to protect what she considered hers. The real enemy was about to make her move. 3 weeks into Preston's Portland residence, Genevieve Margot Hawthorne arrived unannounced. Preston was helping Lily with geometry homework at Danica's kitchen table when the knock came, sharp, authoritative, designed to announce importance. He knew that knock, had heard it his entire life at bedroom doors and office thresholds. Marie answered, her expression shifting from confusion to concern as she recognized the elegantly dressed woman from Preston's descriptions. "Mrs. Hawthorne, I'm here to see my son." It wasn't a request. Genevieve entered the apartment with the confidence of someone who had never been denied entry anywhere. Her eyes catalogued the modest surroundings with visible distaste, the second-hand furniture, the cramped quarters, the evidence of financial limitation that she considered personal failure. Preston stood, instinctively positioning himself between his mother and Lily, who watched. This new arrival with the intense observation skills she had inherited from both parents. "Mother, I see you're still making the same mistakes, Preston." Her voice carried the particular disappointment she had perfected over decades. Not loud, not harsh, just precisely calibrated to wound. "Lily," Preston said quietly, "would you please go to your room for a few minutes?" No. Lily's refusal was immediate. "This is about me. I should hear it." Genevieve's attention shifted to the child, and Preston saw his mother truly look at her granddaughter for the first time. Something flickered across Genevieve's face, recognition perhaps, or calculation. "So this is the child. Her name is Lily," Preston said firmly. "I'm aware. I'm also aware that paternity has not been legally established, that this woman," she gestured toward Danica's bedroom, "disappeared for a decade and has now conveniently reappeared with claims of parentage just as her own situation becomes desperate." "You're suggesting Danica is lying?" "I'm suggesting that desperate people do desperate things, and that the Hawthorne family has resources worth pursuing through whatever fiction necessary." Preston felt rage building, not the cold, controlled anger of boardroom battles, but something hotter, more primitive. The fury of a father whose child had just been dismissed as a scheme. "Get out." The words surprised everyone, including Preston himself. Genevieve's eyebrows rose slightly. "I beg your pardon. I said get out. Leave this apartment. Leave this city. Leave my daughter alone." "Your daughter? You don't even know if—" "She has my eyes," Preston interrupted. "She has my stubborn streak, and my mathematical mind, and my inability to accept incorrect information without challenge. She is absolutely my daughter, and more importantly, she is not your granddaughter." "Preston, you're being emotional." "Yes," he agreed. "I am. For the first time in my life, I'm choosing emotion over strategy, choosing love over safety, choosing my family over your approval." Genevieve's composure cracked slightly. "Your family? A dying woman who hid your child and the product of that deception?" "Yes." "My family." He stepped closer to his mother, close enough that she had to look up to meet his eyes. You bought my silence once. You bought Danica's disappearance. You've bought compliance and performance and the appearance of perfection for 41 years. But you will not buy my daughter. I could destroy you, Genevieve said quietly. Remove you from the company. Cut you off from every resource, every connection, every opportunity the Hawthorne name provides. Then do it. The simple acceptance seemed to shock her more than any argument could have. Do it, Preston repeated. Take everything. The money, the position, the name if you can figure out how. Take it all. But know this, I will still be here. I will still be Lily's father. And you will have lost your son permanently for the temporary satisfaction of control. This was the confrontation Preston had never been brave enough to have at 30. At 24, at any point in his carefully managed existence. But fatherhood, he was discovering, provided courage that self-interest never could. Genevieve stared at her son, as if seeing a stranger wearing his face. You're making a mistake, she said finally. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. When this ends badly, and it will end badly, don't expect me to fix it. I've never expected you to fix anything, Mother. Only to break things that didn't meet your standards. Genevieve left without another word, her heels clicking against the hallway floor with diminishing authority. An hour after Genevieve's departure, another knock came. Preston, still processing the confrontation with his mother, opened the door to find a woman in. Her 70s, silver hair in an elegant bun, wearing a simple navy dress and a slight smile. Aunt Lorraine? Lorraine Beatrice Hawthorne, Preston's aunt, his late father's younger sister, stood in the doorway of Danica's apartment, like an ambassador from a different version of the Hawthorne family. Hello, Preston. May I come in? I promise I'm nothing like your mother. Lorraine had always been the family outlier. She had refused to join the company, pursuing academia instead. She taught economics at Berkeley, lived in a modest home in Marin County, and had spent 40 years politely but firmly rejecting Genevieve's attempts at control. Preston hadn't seen her in 3 years, family gatherings having become battlegrounds that Lorraine chose not to enter. How did you... Your mother called me, raging about your inappropriate choices and the embarrassment you're bringing to the family name. Lorraine entered the apartment, looking around with interest rather than judgment. I figured anything that upset Genevieve that much was worth supporting. She turned to Lily, who had been watching from the kitchen doorway. You must be my grandies. I'm Lorraine. I knew your father when he was your age and significantly less wise than he is now. He wasn't wise at all until recently, Lily observed. Lorraine laughed, a genuine, delighted sound. Oh, I like you already. You get your honesty from your mother, I assume? Mama says honesty is just efficiency. Why waste time with lies when truth gets you there faster? Your mama sounds like someone I would have loved to know. She's in the bedroom, Lily said. She's dying. The bluntness didn't shock Lorraine, who simply nodded. Then we should probably talk quickly. What followed was a conversation that restructured Preston's understanding of family power dynamics. Lorraine revealed documents, saved emails, recorded conversations, evidence of Genevieve's systematic manipulations spanning decades. Your grandfather built this family on integrity, Preston, Lorraine explained, spreading papers across Danica's kitchen table while Lily listened with rapt attention. He was ruthless in business but honest in his dealings. Your mother forgot that. Or rather, she decided that integrity was a luxury the family couldn't afford. Why are you showing me this now? Because you're going to need ammunition when Genevieve tries to take custody of Lily. And she will try. It's not about love. She's incapable of that. It's about control, about ensuring the Hawthorne legacy continues according to her design. She can't take Lily. I'm her father, a father who was absent for 9 years, a father whose mother has unlimited legal resources, a father who just chose a dying woman and a child over family expectations. Lorraine's tone was matter-of-fact, not cruel. Genevieve will paint you as unstable, emotional, unfit, unless you're prepared to fight differently than she expects. How? By having allies she doesn't anticipate. Like me, like Jonathan Reeves. Yes, I know Jonathan, and he's already working on your behalf. Like the 3 board members who have been waiting for an opportunity to reduce Genevieve's influence. Preston stared at his aunt with new appreciation. You've been planning this. I've been waiting for you to give me a reason to act. Choosing your daughter over your mother's approval? That's the best reason I could imagine. While Preston battled external threats, Danica fought an internal war she couldn't win. Dr. Sylvia Morrison visited the apartment, a house call that spoke to both Danica. His deteriorating condition and the doctor's personal investment in her patient. We're looking at days, maybe a week, she told Preston privately while Lily was at school. Her body is shutting down. We can manage pain, maintain comfort, but she's dying. Yes, I'm sorry. Preston found Danica awake, but fragile, her breathing shallow, her skin translucent in the afternoon light filtering through her bedroom window. The doctor talked to you, she observed. Yes. Days, not weeks. Yes. Danica nodded, accepting this information with the same practical grace she had applied to every challenge. I need to talk to Lily. Prepare her. Do you want me there? No, this needs to be ours. But thank you. That afternoon, when Lily returned from school, Danica gathered her remaining strength for the most important conversation of both their lives. Preston, sitting in the living room, could hear their voices through the thin walls. Danica's weak but determined, Lily's occasionally breaking with suppressed emotion. You are not responsible for my happiness, Danica was saying. You are not responsible for Preston's growth or his failures. You are responsible only for becoming the amazing person you already are. But what if I forget you? Lily's voice, smaller than Preston had ever heard it. Impossible. I'm written into your DNA, your mannerisms, your way of seeing the world. You'll find me in your own reflection, in your own choices, in the way you refuse to accept less than you deserve. What if Preston goes back to being who he was? Then you remind him who he chose to become. But I don't think he will. People can surprise you, baby. Even people who have failed before. You're not scared. No, I'm tired. There's a difference. And I'm at peace because I know you're going to be okay. More than okay. You're going to be extraordinary. That evening, after Lily had cried herself to sleep, curled against her, mother's side, Preston sat with Danica in the darkness of her room. Thank you, Danica said quietly. For what? For proving me wrong. For showing up. For becoming someone Lily can depend on. I should have been that person 10 years ago. Yes. But you weren't capable of it then. People grow at different rates, Preston. Some of us are forced to grow up early by circumstance. Some have the luxury of extended adolescence. You're growing now. That matters. Preston reached for her hand, bones prominent beneath tissue paper skin, and held it gently. I loved you, he said. I never stopped. Even when you vanished, even when I convinced myself I had moved on, I loved you. I know. Did you love me? Danica considered the question, owing him honesty in these final hours. I loved who you could have been. I loved moments when that person emerged, usually when your mother wasn't watching. But I couldn't wait for you to find yourself. I had to find myself first. I understand. I know you do. Now, they sat in comfortable silence, two people who had loved imperfectly but genuinely, who had created something beautiful despite their failures. I have 2 requests, Danica said finally. Anything. First, don't let her forget me. Not in a morbid way, no shrines or constant grief, but keep me present in stories, in memories, in acknowledgement that she came. From 2 people who loved her even when they couldn't love each other. I promise. Second, don't let her become your mother's project. Genevieve will try to reshape Lily into something acceptable, something manageable. Don't let her. Lily is perfect in her imperfection. She's stubborn and brilliant and occasionally difficult. Let her be all of those things. I'll protect her. Not just protect. Celebrate. Celebrate her oddness, her questions, her refusal to conform. She's going to challenge every system she encounters. Let her, like her mother, like both her parents, when they're being their best selves. Danica Marie Wells died at 3:15 a.m. on a Tuesday, exactly 10 years and 6 months after she had vanished from Preston's life. She was not alone. Lily lay beside her, one small hand holding her mother's increasingly still fingers. Preston sat in the chair he had occupied for 3 weeks, bearing witness to a goodbye that no child should have to say. Marie was there, having arrived the day before when it became clear the end was approaching. She stood in the doorway, tears flowing silently, grieving both for Danica and for the child who was about to lose her anchor. Danica's breathing had been labored for hours, each inhale a monumental effort. But suddenly, unexpectedly, she opened her eyes fully, completely present for one final moment. She looked at Lily with infinite love, then at Preston with something that might have been forgiven or might have been released. "Be good to each other," she whispered. Then, Danica Marie Wells completed her mission. She gave her daughter a father, whether he deserved it or not. The room filled with a particular kind of silence, not empty but full, holding the echo of a life that had mattered, that had created beauty from broken circumstances, that had loved fiercely even when love seemed impossible. The funeral was small but meaningful. Danica's colleagues from the design world, parents of Lily's classmates who had become friends, Marie and her family, Lorraine, representing a different kind of Hawthorne than Genevieve had ever embodied, Jonathan Reeves, present as both legal counsel and emotional support. Genevieve did not attend. Her absence was a gift. Lily delivered the eulogy with the same direct honesty that characterized everything she did. "My mama wasn't perfect. She made mistakes. She made choices that hurt people, including herself. But she loved me completely. She taught me to be strong without being cruel, smart without being superior, independent without being alone. She was the best mother I could have had, and now she's gone. But I'm still here, and I'm going to make her proud by becoming everything she believed I could be." Legal matters resolved quickly. Danica had been thorough, will be updated. Guardianship clearly stated, no room for challenge. Custody transferred to Preston with Marie named as co-guardian should anything happen to him. Genevieve made one attempt at legal intervention, claiming Preston's emotional instability and recent erratic behavior made him unfit. Lorraine's evidence, Jonathan's legal expertise, and the unified front of 3 board members threatening to expose decades of financial manipulation ended that attempt before it reached a courtroom. Preston stepped back from his CEO role, promoting Victor Cross to manage operations while he retained ownership, but not daily involvement. The board, relieved to have stability after weeks of uncertainty, approved unanimously. "You're walking away from everything you built," Jonathan observed. "No," Preston corrected. "I'm walking toward everything that matters." Saturday morning. Portland had given way to a modest house in Marin County, close enough to San Francisco for necessary business but far enough for independence. Preston stood in the kitchen making pancakes, a skill he had learned through YouTube tutorials and multiple failures. Lily sat at the counter, reading a book about molecular biology that was intended for high school students. "Those are burning," she observed without looking up. Preston flipped the pancake, finding it indeed darker than intended. "They're caramelized. They're carbon. Carbon is essential to life, not when it's supposed to be breakfast." They had developed this rhythm, gentle teasing that never crossed into cruelty, honest observation that never became harsh criticism. It wasn't the family either of them had planned, but it was the family they were building. Lily still challenged him constantly, though the challenges had shifted from tests of commitment to negotiations of boundary. "Can I get a tattoo?" "When you're 18. That's 9 years away. And yes, I can do math. What if it's a memorial tattoo for Mama? Then you can get it when you're 18, and it will mean even more because you chose to wait." That's manipulation disguised as wisdom. I learned from the best, Mama or Grandmother Genevieve. Both, unfortunately, they visited Danica's grave every Sunday, not from obligation, but from choice. They would sit on the grass, Preston reading the business section while Lily told her mother about her week, the teacher who underestimated her, the boy who tried to copy her homework, The perfect score on an exam designed to challenge students 3 years older. She would have been proud of you, Preston would say. She was proud of me, Lily would correct. Past tense doesn't erase present truth. 3 months after the funeral, Lily had started calling him Dad. Not consistently, not consciously, but occasionally, when she was distracted or excited or forgot to maintain distance. Dad, look at this article about CRISPR gene editing. Dad, can we get Thai food for dinner? Dad, you're wearing 2 different socks again. Each time, Preston's heart would stop for a moment, overwhelmed by a title he had, done nothing to earn for 9 years, but was now fighting to deserve every day. He didn't build an empire for her. He built a home. He learned to braid hair from YouTube tutorials and consistently failed. He attended parent-teacher conferences where teachers described Lily as brilliant but challenging, and he responded, "Good. The world needs challenges." He helped with homework he sometimes didn't understand, Googling concepts while she wasn't looking. He made mistakes, forgot important dates, said the wrong thing occasionally, reverted to Preston Hawthorne III instead of just being Dad. But he stayed. He showed up. He chose them every day. It took Danica dying for Preston to start living. For 41 years he had existed within parameters set by others, his grandfather, his legacy, his mother's expectations, society's definition of success. He had accumulated wealth without worth, power without purpose, achievement without satisfaction. But in 90 days, 3 months of showing up, failing, trying again, he discovered what actual success looked like. It looked like a 9-year-old rolling her eyes at his terrible jokes. It looked like Sunday visits to a grave where forgiveness had replaced regret. It looked like choosing presence over profit, connection over control, love over legacy. Sometimes the people who hurt us are also the people capable of healing us, if they choose to grow. Preston had hurt Danica with his cowardice, hurt Lily with his absence, hurt himself with his compliance to expectations that never served him. But he was learning that hurt didn't have to be permanent, that people could change, not dramatically but incrementally, choice by choice, day by day. Forgiveness isn't about excusing what happened. Danica never excused Preston's failures, but she refused to let those failures have the last word. She gave him a chance at redemption, not because he deserved it, but because Lily deserved a father. And Preston was learning to be one. Every moment is a chance to become who you were meant to be. Preston Hawthorne wasted 10 years, but in 3 months he became a father. Not a perfect one. Perfection was neither achievable nor desirable, but a present one, a trying one, a staying one. If this story moved you, if you believe in redemption, second chances, and the fierce love of mothers, I need you to do 4 things right now. Hit that like button so this message reaches more hearts. Everyone tells the algorithm that stories like this matter, that people need to hear about. Love that transcends failure and courage that comes too late but comes nonetheless. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to change. Maybe it's your estranged parent. Maybe it's your stubborn friend. Maybe it's you, sitting there thinking your mistakes have disqualified you from beauty. Share this story and let it be proof that redemption exists. Drop a comment telling me what this story meant to you. I read every single one. Tell me about your Danica, the person who loved you despite yourself. Tell me about your Preston, the person who finally showed up. Tell me about your Lily, the child who deserved better but made the best of what they got. Your stories matter, and this community needs to hear them. Subscribe to Mr. Steele Rich Stories and hit that notification bell so you never miss another powerful story. We're more than entertainment here. We're a family of people who believe in the power of narrative to transform lives. Thank you for being part of this family. We're past 3,500 strong, and together we're going to keep growing. Not just in numbers, but in empathy, in understanding, in the capacity to see ourselves in others' stories. Until next time, remember, your story isn't over. Your next chapter is waiting to be written. Make it count. Next week, another story of impossible odds, unbreakable love, and the choices that define us. A woman who lost everything discovers that sometimes emptiness makes room for miracles. A man who never learned to love finds himself responsible for 3 hearts that aren't his own. A family built not from blood, but from the decision to stay. Don't miss it. Because every story we tell is really about you, your capacity to change, your ability to love, your power to become more than your mistakes. See you next week, family.